Miss Shadia.
Sorry, I just cannot find it.
Thank you.
Okay, we are recording.
Awesome. Thanks. Tony, you'll have to show me how to do that later. So thank you everyone for joining us for our 6th DSP partnership workshop. I can't believe that we're halfway through the year at this point and 4 months away from filing Oregon's first DSP. So thank you for all of your participation thus far and being a partner with us as we create this new process. So I think everybody's familiar with the meeting logistics. I'll just go through the agenda. So today we want to give an update on our community engagement plan. We had a workshop a couple weekends ago. We had over 40 attendees. Jen will give all of the details for that, but that's really an exciting update that we have to give today. We'll give an update on our hosting capacity work. We've been working with the OPUC's technical work group to provide feedback on our map and have gotten, I think, over 60 comments regarding our just recommendations and feedback around how we can improve the map. We'll show some updates to our baseline data and system assessment. I just want to point out that we did put our template on the website. We haven't received any comments or feedback on that to date. So please go online, look at the template. Tony's going to be updating that, I think sometime this week. So if you are interested in looking at that data set, please provide feedback as soon as possible. We'll take a quick break and then we're going to show our approach to our long-term plan, as well as a kickoff to how we think the report for the DSP should be laid out. We're going to provide the report template that we'll show you today out for comments. So if there are things that we're missing or we should be thinking about, please provide feedback in that report template. We would hope to be able to share out a draft of the report closer to the filing, but given the timing and how much time we have, we may not be able to do that. So we're trying to seek as much feedback now and in July as we can to make sure that we're capturing everything in the report that we should be. And then finally, based on our last meeting, for May, we went through our non-wire alternative work that we had done today, our non-wire solutions that we had done today, and we realized that we really need to just step back and kind of level set with what non-wire solutions are, make sure we all are in agreement with a definition, what the resources would look like. So Bashir will be presenting some work that we're going to do with that. And our hope here is that we just take a slower approach in how we're thinking about non-wire alternatives. And so this will be the first of many conversations around NWAs. Just a quick reminder that our website that we just launched last month is here for you. We do have a feedback form that we'd love you to fill out. Shadia, do we have also a sign-in sheet? A virtual sign-in sheet?
Yeah, we have one. It's on the page 1 of the slide deck that I'm hoping everybody was able to get.
So here.
Yeah, that
Oh.
is, yeah.
No, it's
that
not
is
on.
Mostly if people over there. Yeah. So if anybody would like to participate, extra points for in between workshops with feedback, there's a part on that sign-up sheet that says which one of the work streams you would be interested in participating. That way we can reach back to you via email if you so would like to do.
And I think it's on the website too, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, it's helpful for us if you could either use that link or drop your name and organization in the chat. It's helpful for us to make sure that we're collecting the comments and the feedback that we get in this meeting, and we're assigning the right name and organization to that. The other quick reminder is that if you're interested in participating in the OPUC's technical working group, there are 3 sessions left. They've been, I think, really informative and helpful from our perspective. So we encourage participation there as well. The next one is on June 30th. So as I mentioned before, we're at our June meeting.
Nick has his hand up.
Oh, Nick.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Angela. I was just going to say we may meet subsequently to those last meetings. I think in the July meeting, we want to talk to everybody and find out if those are valuable to continue into the fall. So that series may go on a little bit longer, to be decided. And thanks, Angela, for including the reminder there for everybody.
Great. Yeah, my vote would be, I think that we heard in our last meeting that there's a lot of discussion or interest around demographics and socioeconomics. Just kind of there's a lot of data out there between the utilities and the state, and so I think that would be a good forum of conversation too, Nick. Just a heads up. I think we put something in our slides for that.
Angela, there is also a comment on the chat that June 30th is also the date that PAC has their DSP workshop.
What time is anyone from PAC on the call? Because I think, Nick, you have your presentation at 9. Well, maybe we could drop it.
This is Eric. I think our meeting's actually on the 29th, and then the technical working group is on the 30th. So our meeting is 10 o'clock on Tuesday, June 29th. So,
yeah,
so I think we'd argue.
Sorry, Eric, I was just going to confirm you're exactly right. 29th and 30th.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. So we're here in June. We committed early on in our timeline that we would present our hosting capacity analysis. So we'll do that today. And we're kind of in the stretch now to wrap up the community engagement and long-term plan requirements of the DSP. So Jen, are you on the call?
I am.
Hi, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Hey, all. Thanks, Angela. My name is Jen Lathu. I use she, her pronouns. This will be 10 years coming up this year that I've been at PGE. Most of my time has been within customer-focused teams and working on projects that support our customers. My professional background is really in organizational change management. And for the last 8 years or so, I've been a parent and community advocate for racial equity in the Portland Public Schools. I really share that information with you all because my current role is as a practitioner on the community outreach team within the PGE's DEI office is a culmination of that background and really informs that, and my lived experience informs how I approach this work. I've also not had the opportunity to present to you all, so I just wanted to kind of introduce myself. As Angela mentioned, I'll provide an update about the community workshops. I know that is the big ticket item here. But in order to frame up that conversation, and I have a few slides that I'd like to share out ahead. Some of those slides may be familiar, so they'll serve as reminders and context setting, and I'll try to move through those pretty quickly. We can move on to the next slide. You all have seen a version of this probably, I think, last month. And really, this is included as a level set and outline of what we understand, we as PGE understand the policy goals of the UM 2005 docket to be. Since this is pretty word heavy, I think that this version really emphasizes the key elements within each bullet. So, you know, we think about the authentic choices, inclusivity, reducing energy burden, approachable and fully accessible. All of those items that we see as really a part of where we're focused. We can move to the next slide. And so as we look to center equity and we look at best practices and the importance of really identifying what our intended outcomes are, this slide speaks to the importance of being intentional about those. And so we know that racial equity or inequities are not random. They've been created and sustained over time. And so with that, we acknowledge that there are structural and systemic inequities and that they exist and are a part of the reality we live in. The second bullet, so without intentional intervention, institutions and structures continue to perpetuate inequities. And so the way we combat that is to integrate an explicit consideration of racial equity in our decisions. Our intent, and this speaks to the third bullet, is to ensure that community has a seat and a voice in the process. And so that speaks to the procedural equity. As we shift into a more, what I like to call people and community-centered approach for how we do work at PGE, in particular to the DSP docket here, we're committed to being transparent and candid in the process. The DSP has really provided us an opportunity to be more transparent and more broadly share out information, and will eventually make available to you all, I think, and that's what Angela was speaking to in terms of our internet page and the information, and I think the data that was discussed last month. Those are things that we have not always made available to folks or shared out so broadly at PGE. And so this process has given us the opportunity to promote that transparency and candor. When it comes to community engagement, it's really a muscle that we at PGE are beginning to build. We know that it's a learning process, and as a result, when we learn, we know that opportunities to improve will surface. And we also know that there are constraints that will influence the way we make decisions or we do something. And so our intent is to communicate information with that transparency and candor, and to make sure that folks know that that our intentions are clear. The image on the right is known as the twin goals of racial equity and carbon reduction, and they were developed through the Zero Cities work. The idea here is that if racial equity is not explicitly considered in our strategies, that we'll continue to develop ineffective strategies and leave out communities, in particular communities of color and those that we have underserved in the past. So you can move to the next slide. So this is a similar slide that you all have seen before as well. The key point here is that our policy goals and our intended outcomes inform this integrated community approach as we consider internal coordination and external engagement work. Internally, we apply an equity lens, which are those explicit equitable considerations that was discussed just a moment ago in the DSP requirement areas. And externally, we're looking to partner, and we have been partnering with community to leverage their expertise, in particular community-based organizations, or CBOs, we often refer to them as, in reaching and serving populations that we haven't historically reached and or served, and deferring to them to lead the development of what information should be developed and how we engage. You can go to the next slide. So speaking of the internal portion, this building on the application of an equity lens internally, this slide really speaks to our response to what we heard last month in the workshop around adding a human element to our data. And Tony provided an overview of the baseline data, and a lot of that was at the grid level and an initial cut that had feeders and substations and was very technical. We heard feedback that incorporating that human element to the technical data was something that folks are interested in. And as we are trying to be responsive to our feedback and also ensuring that we're integrating an application of an equity lens, this slide really speaks to the data sources that we've identified as overlays for that baseline data. So the top one on the right is the American Community Survey data, which allows us to add a layer of public data to the baseline. And it includes race, ethnicity, age, income, heating type, and housing type. And then the lower image is something that we are currently investigating, and that's the Environmental Protection Agency's environmental justice mapping and screening tool, which is called EJ Screen. I think that this is really important because in my experience, when we talk about data, and particularly how it's called out on this, is that the Government Alliance for Racial Equity, as part of their racial equity tool, is a very poignant question to say, what does the data tell us? And so in my experience, data is highly desirable and folks can't get enough of it. However, it's often underused, and underused in the way that without knowing what the story is behind it and what is this telling us, and using it to truly define what is, so that we can set aside and sideline our assumptions, uncover the real trends and the disparities that potentially exist, and allow us to truly get to the story behind the data. So this is an example of something we're working on in response to that feedback that we got last month, and also something that we are doing based on best practices as well. And so there's more to come on this, and I don't know, I'll pause there and see if, I don't know if Angela or anybody on the team wants to add any more with regard to the data.
It looks like we have a question from Heather. And then Nick. We'll go Heather, then Nick.
Hello. Hi, Jen. Thank you. Can you say a little more about what the, okay, so the baseline data, what granularity is it? Like, is it by feeder, zip code, neighborhood? And then what granularity is the American Community Survey / EJ screen?
So Tony, are you able to answer the first part of that question?
Well, I think, Heather, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're asking for the EJ screen and the American Community Survey. How does it border its stats? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. What are the geographical boundaries? Yes.
Yes. So that's
And
more.
and
That's not
Tony, I
mine.
think-
It's more of. I would go with Jennifer. If you can answer how the stats are bordered. Is it by zip code? Is it by city? Is it the racial components? Do they do it by city, by?
Well, Tony, can you answer the first part of Heather's question, which is how is the baseline data? So Heather, we have the baseline data and system assessment, which is the requirements in the DSP. And those are all at the feeder level. Is that what you just said, Tony?
Correct, they're at feeder level.
But we got feedback last month that people would like it at the zip code. And I think it's.
Yeah, I didn't hear it by zip code. They're asking by density, potentially square mileage. I think that was it Christopher who mentioned that, the square mileage, if you can get some kind of density. They mentioned it, but they were talking about the social economic data, if they can get that by, yeah.
Okay, and then the second part of the question, Jen, for how
Sure thing. Sorry, I can add. This is Jake Wise. I support Jen Latu and our community outreach team. The ACS data is down at the census block level, so that is the smallest geographic boundary within the census data.
Okay, I had a little trouble tracking the answer there. Can the feeder level baseline data from PGE be aggregated into census block level?
No, it can't. Not now, unless you do a complete revamp of how we do our engineering.
Okay, well, I'm just curious how this will work then. I mean, I'm sure you all have ideas, and I'm just excited to see the outcome when it does happen.
Yeah, so Heather, it's a good question. This is one earlier in the presentation when I was mentioning that we wanted to coordinate with ODO and the other IOUs and staff and any other state agency that might be interested. our partner that might be interested in how we would do this mapping, because it's going to take significant changes in figuring out like how do we collect data on our end to then overlay these maps. And maybe it won't be perfect. We can today, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, we can overlay this data. It just may not fit perfectly over like a feeder or zip code because of how we're collecting data, but you could lay it on the map.
Yeah,
So you
if
could at least see it.
you're going to see census data today from the hosting capacity analysis and from the baseline today that shows census data, and it is an overlay. And we were going to show that later on in the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, I think also just to appreciate Jen's framing of all this, which is everyone is asking for more data and the data exists and we just want people to give it a shot, which is what you all are doing. So thank you. Thank you for giving this a shot.
Thanks. I see this as being one of those areas that is, we should spend some time digging into as a group to figure out what's the best approach, and then make sure that there's consistency across all the IOUs and how the state collects data. Because I think that would be the best way to make sure that it's informative and useful. And so, but I'm excited to see how this is all coming together, and this idea I don't think we would have generated on our own, so this is one of the good outcomes of doing these workshops. Jen, do you want me to say, oh, we had a question from Nick, sorry.
No need to apologize, Angela. I think my question got answered. It was going to be that hopefully the Census Bureau makes this easily accessible and doesn't make it a chore to sort of grab that and include it. And I think either Jen or Tony or both of you said that it's already at least some level being integrated and overlaid. So I think that answers my question. Thanks.
Great. Any other questions? Okay. Let me mute this participant that's not on mute for us, Jen. Oh, Jenny Hall, I think you're not on mute. I'm gonna mute you. Okay, there. Jen, I have transitioned for us.
Thank you.
There is a question on the chat about Chris Crock. Jen, can you read that question?
Yeah, let's see.
Thank you.
Examples of racial inequities within the structures and systems. A lot of this really stems back to energy burden, which is a common discussion we have when we talk about inequities and who's impacted. What we're talking about with racial equities and the utilities and specific, the recent conversations are really about those who have the burden of higher energy cost based on their income and how much of their income is being used towards that. And that is stemming from not having access or awareness or eligibility to participate in programs that around energy efficiency and having the resources to do so. So that is often when we're talking about the inequities as it relates to energy, that's a common example of what we're often referring to. Does that answer that question, Christopher?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it doesn't really tie it to race. To me, that sounds like we're talking about schedule types, customer types, and how costs get allocated.
So the importance of the data really is getting to that is seeing, we know that we have historically underserved communities of color, and that fits into the racial category. The importance of the data and the discussion we just had is really getting to the facts to see what does that look like. We know generally that has been the case, and what we're trying to get to is get more specific about what that actually looks like. What are the trends? Who are we serving? Who are we not? What are the challenges or barriers to participation folks have? and eventually, like when we talk about energy burden, who are we talking about when we talk about energy burden? There has been other work outside of PGE, like within the Zero Cities and other efforts that have been able to talk more about vulnerable communities and how they're being affected. And these studies around energy burden, we at PGE are looking at our customers, and that baseline data and doing those overlays are going to help inform the specifics about what that means at PGE. And be able to more directly tie into what you're asking around race specific, if we're talking specifically about our customers and PGE specifically.
You know, Chris, I think a good example might be like if we were to apply this and kind of data and analytics, if we were looking to see what type of homes do people of color typically live in, we might find that they actually live in older homes that need significant upgrades and things like weatherization, energy efficiency, and they might be paying a higher amount in their energy bill because their home isn't weatherized. And these are all opportunities for us to be able to make sure that when we partner with Energy Trust and we're doing our own programs, that we're providing maybe higher incentives, or we're targeting those homes to make sure that we're weatherizing those homes and making sure they're sealed up so that they're paying for the energy that they're really using. And so I think the data can help us start to identify how we can better utilize our programs to help those communities. And I think that that's just one opportunity. It's probably many. And what I would hope for the PGE team is that as we start to look at data, we start to really see what that data is telling us, like what Jen said, to see where the opportunities are. And if there are, you know, if we see a significant amount of opportunity to weatherize homes or provide renewable or community renewables, whatever it might be for those areas, then that's where we're really focused on, rather than taking kind of just a blanket approach for our program. So Chris, is that example like help illustrate some of the opportunities we see with understanding the data?
Yeah, it shows some of what you're trying to accomplish.
I think that there's a lot here that we're going to learn over the next couple years as we dig into this data and see what it tells us. So ongoing conversation for sure, I think. And it looks like Chris, Jennifer dropped a chat in the chat for you. Do you want to stay here, Jen, or do you want to transition?
I don't think we spoke to this, so but all have seen this slide previously. So this is just a reminder that PGE is contracted with the Community Energy Project, Unite, Oregon, and the Coalition Communities of Color to support the development of our community engagement plan. CEP has led with the energy education development and has had technical support from Energy Trust of Oregon and NWEC, and this was in partnership with Unite. Unite has recruited and convened folks from Multnomah County, Washington County, and Clackamas counties, and PGE and ETO have done some work to do recruitment in Yamhill and Marion counties, which was outside of Unite's reach. CCC is in the process of analyzing and synthesizing community insights and developing recommendations that represent the basis of our community engagement plan. And then we can move to the next slide. And that all is to frame up. Oh.
Sorry, Jen, did you say transition that someone's cutting down a tree next to my house? So I'm going to put myself on mute and transition 1 second.
Okay, and so all of that to frame up that the workshop took place, and working with the CBO partners really provided an opportunity to learn more about developing a meaningful experience for participants in the community. We often show up to spaces as technical advisors And when doing so, we forget about assumptions that we bring. Um, my colleagues often say that we tend to lead with the what instead of the why. And it's important that we're identifying the problem, providing information needed to solve the problem, and articulating and communicating out specifically how we are going to use feedback and information that we collect within these forums. When we fail to provide that information and that additional context and make connections, we really miss opportunities to build desire, invoke interest, and really authentically engage people. And so those were throughout the process of development and partnering with CEP, Unite, and CCC, those were the learnings that we really, I guess, characterized as being really key for us. And so getting into the actual workshops themselves, they were held on May 22nd and 23rd, which was a Saturday and Sunday. There were 2 3-hour sessions and about 40 participants. And there was simultaneous Spanish translation that occurred at that time. Saturday was really focused on energy and DSP kind of 101 or foundations, and provided a lot of the context setting. And Sunday was really about distributed energy resources and was a little bit more technical. And it included demand response as well. So the makeup of each day really was a third of it being focused on sharing information or context. And then 2/3 of the day was really around discussion and engaging with the audience. CEP presented the content, and Unite facilitated the activities and the discussion. Each of the sessions kicked off with music as people joined. There was land acknowledgement, community agreements, introductions, icebreaker activities with really cool and interesting interactive mapping tools. And I bring these things up just to emphasize the importance of, and I guess what I would call a deliberate investment in community and connection building that was created within the space to make it very welcoming and in a place where folks wanted and cared to really share their thoughts and have conversation. I'm trying to read the chat at the same time. So I'll pause there. I'm not sure in terms of what we've committed to as far as sharing specifics or from the workshops themselves. Was that a discussion that was?
Did we, so we did commit that all the participants, and just I'm just level setting for myself. So when we did the workshops, PGE was not in attendance, right? We might have had one or two people, but like the larger group wasn't there because we committed to confidentiality to make it an open space for people, for all 40 participants to be able to feel like they could actually speak to the issues without a bunch of PGE people in the room, for lack of better words. Is that right?
That's correct. Christian and I joined on Saturday morning, just in very briefly for the first 15 minutes or so to share kind of why we're asking folks now. Like, why are we engaging folks? What was the purpose of our engagement from a PGE perspective? And then we left. So we were not actually there. And that is a common practice in community workshops and community engagement forums, is because we recognize that there is reservations or in sharing information when entities we are talking about or potentially going to talk about or have a sense of mistrust for are in the room. And so to create more of a inclusive and welcoming environment, we did choose to step back. So that's correct.
And then we'll receive, after the workshops and the collection of input, report that we will attach to the DSP and share out. I think Jake will even have a presentation from, is it CCC will present for us, or Jen?
So-
I don't know.
Yeah, I met with CEP, CCC, and Unite on Monday. They will join us next month to share out learnings that they gathered from the workshop, as well as the high-level recommendations that would inform our community engagement plan.
Great work on this, Jen. I think this is really exciting, and from the chats, I think other people feel the same. But I'd open it up to, do you have one more slide after this?
No, this is
okay.
it.
Then maybe open it up to questions and comments. All right, well, Jen, I'm sure next month when we share out our results, we'll have a lot of participation. So we'll probably have to give you more than 15 minutes for next month.
Yeah, and then the organizations will be actually joining us and presenting themselves, speaking from their experience.
That's very exciting. Well, thank you so much, Jen, for your time today. And we'll transition to the next set of slides where we'll be talking about hosting capacity. And then I do want to acknowledge, sorry, I just saw Heather's comment in the chat. Jen, I don't know if there's a way that we could share out the slides in Spanish, but if we're able to, do you mind sharing those out?
Yeah, I think we can double check. I know there's a Spanish version. I don't know that I have access to, or that I have them yet, but we can reach out to CP.
Yeah, Jake mentioned that we can get those slides available on our DSP site. So maybe we will publish them tomorrow on our DSP site so anybody can have access on them.
Perfect. And Shadia, can we make a note to send out an email to the larger group to let them know when they are posted?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks. Great feedback. All right, thank you, Jen. Misty, Joe?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Misty Gao. I am an analyst in distributed resource planning team at PGE. I partner with Joe Boilers to work on hosting capacity analysis. Based on OPUC's DSP guidelines, one of our main tasks is to create a map to identify areas of limited DR growth. Since we are still on the stage 1 of hosting capacity analysis, what we have here right now is not a hosting capacity map yet. This is a map we use our current available distribution planning data to try to provide useful information to our stakeholders. After creating the map, we have implemented a 2-sprint feedback process to improve the map. Thanks to the working group who volunteered reviewing, provide lots of insightful feedback. So far, we have received 108 feedback items, and we completed 56 items. And for the rest items, we deliver spring release notes to respond to each feedback. Next, Joe will talk in more detail about our plans and introduce the map. So please, Joe.
And Misty, we lost you there for a second, but just to make sure that I heard correctly what you said, we're going to have 2 sprints. We just got done with the first sprint.
We have done 2 sprints.
Oh, 2 sprints and yes. 180. So I was way off. It's 180 feedback and comments.
108 total feedbacks. Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you, Misty, and thank you for all your work on this. Joe, would you like me to transition to the next slide?
Yeah, go ahead. Next slide. Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Boyles, as Misty introduced, project manager with the DRP team. I'm going to do a quick run through a lot of the slides that we've provided in past presentations, just to kind of reorient and make sure everybody's on the same page with respect to what we're trying to do. Misty called out this crawl set of goals, identifying areas of limited DER growth and providing a plan to conduct hosting capacity. I think that third bullet or that, plan may address alternative tool options that may provide more approachable and instructive data for communities. That's pretty important in this effort that we're doing now. And I want to echo one of the concepts that Jen mentioned, and that we're building this muscle, which is putting this data on a map, inviting you guys to take a look at it and figuring out where there's value and what we could do better. So go ahead to the next slide. So the approach right now is really focused on enabling decision-making and decision-making around, I guess, siting and sizing of distributed energy resources. And one of the things that's become abundantly clear as we've gone through this process is that we shouldn't be referring to this as DERs. We should probably just be referring to distributed generation. So one of the things that will come out of this process is renaming our map, something to be more accurate with respect to what it actually does. Because DERs include electric vehicles and smart thermostats and other devices, demand response devices that are installed that are not going to be on this map. So we're focusing on DER readiness, and that's a way to think of the system data that we have. So we can pull the system data together to represent where we can place DERs and where we can't, or where it will be more difficult. In the effort we're going through now, we're trying to figure out whether or not we can put some of that data on a map in a way that adds enough value that we should publish it for everybody to consume. And this capability will evolve over time. So as the crawl, walk, run illustrates, in the first iteration of the DSP, we're producing a plan for hosting capacity. And next year, we intend to actually execute a hosting capacity analysis, and that'll be the first one. And as we get that first hosting capacity analysis done, we'll iterate on that and improve on that and figure out how we add value to that capability. Next slide. This is just a representation of the kind of relationship between screening activities that we do, PGE, as we look at placement of distributed energy resources. So what our current, the map that we've produced is trying to get at is that first screen, like, is there space for this device? And is there a way that we can communicate that to the public in a way that maybe accelerates their decision-making or enables it? Hosting capacity analysis would add more detail to that. So it would provide a more thorough look at, maybe there is capacity in an area, but maybe the device that's being evaluated has some special characteristics that put other stresses on the system. And hosting capacity analysis will help us evaluate that. And then a system impact analysis is a broader look at the system, like placement of a particular device may affect more than the feeder or substation that it's connected to, and we have to look at that. Next slide. So the next couple slides are basically talking about the specific activities that we're doing right now. So this focuses on evaluation of DER limitations. It is specific to the map we produced and invited the technical working group to evaluate. Our goal is to go through a few iterations of evaluating that map and adding feedback so that we can figure out if it's ready for prime time, right? Is it something that we can actually publish and share with the rest of the public and the rest of the DSP community? And the next slide.
I just want to point out here, Joe, that is there something that you're trying to tell us with this scooter, that it's not even like a scooter for adults, it's a scooter for preschoolers? Is that where we really are right now? We're in the like baby stage?
It is a pretty scooter, yes.
Okay, yes. So noted.
Yes. And the in tandem with showing this DER readiness map, which again is system data that we have, is that we need to figure out how to do a hosting capacity analysis, right? So we're doing a few pilot activities with respect to hosting capacity, like how do we configure the tool Drive, that's the tool we use to do the system evaluation. How do we configure it to produce a hosting capacity analysis that we believe in? So we know from other states that, based on the settings that you use in your tool that does the hosting capacity analysis, you could come up with an analysis that says there's no capacity anywhere on the system. And we know that's simply not true. So we need to calibrate that analysis to make sure that it produces a result that is meaningful. So we started that process, and we'll be able to explain that and elaborate on the assumptions and the settings and the methodology in that first iteration of the DSP. Next slide. So this is a quick look at the feedback process. As we started out early, we said we're going to do 2, maybe 3 sprints, each sprint being 3 weeks. We used the first week to gather feedback from the technical working group, and we had 18 volunteers from the technical working group to provide that feedback. Thank you all. In week 2 and 3, we internally at PGE would go through sort of an analysis, design, and development process to address the feedback that we received. And then we basically play all that feedback and responses back to the technical working group at the beginning of the next sprint. So we provide like release notes to say, this is what we included, this is what we didn't, these are clarifications that we provided based on questions we received. So if there are any questions or comments about that, we can go to the next slide.
And Joe, we'll share the map, I think.
Yep.
Okay.
That's where we are. So maybe just to recap, the goals here, like Jen talked about, community engagement, is to build this muscle of providing this data in a public way that adds value, that enables people to kind of consume it and think about how they would use it in their own decision-making process. So, we're down that path now. We're trying to learn ourselves, and I've got on the next slide, I've got a couple takeaways that we have from the activity. And there are some minimum requirements for the
bed over there and put it next to Dale's bed. And so there's these cute pictures of Dale and Yeti just like napping on their beds together.
Hi.
I wish we could see the pictures of them napping together on the bed.
They did sound cute. They did.
So I'm going to jump into the map, and first I'm going to talk about the basic requirements, and then I'm going to show some additional things that we added to the map and talk about how we think those could be used. The technical working group has been through this, so the 18 folks that have provided a lot of the feedback have heard this a couple times. So I invite that group as well to kind of jump in or add comments, good or bad, about how they received the information, right? Like what it meant to them, whether they're able to use it. So I'm going to steal the screen, hopefully effectively here.
And while you're doing that, does anyone from the testing group, without calling on any names, does anybody want to add anything to what Joe just discussed?
All right.
They're probably thinking, Joe, well, just read our comments.
Right.
That's why we provided them in writing to you.
Got the spreadsheet up. We could go through all 108. I don't think that's necessary. So I've got the map shown. Is it displaying? People see it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what I have here are the two.
We have somebody that has a question.
Yeah, Stephen, go ahead.
And then we have Heather.
Hey, Joe, thanks. So curious, just the daytime minimum load is that based off of just an average from the SCADA data from the substation?
It is measured at the substation, yes. Yeah.
And it's just
so
it's just an average value?
It is
Or is it-
specific.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by average. It is the absolute minimum for the time period that we evaluated, right? And typically that's a 6 month. We do it every 6 months, and we observe the prior 12 months when we do the evaluation.
Copy, but the SCADA data, that's updating your servers minute by minute, right?
Actually,
excuse me, Stephen. This is Derek over.
Yeah, Derek would.
And so I'm trying to get to the bottom of your question. And so you're asking about SCADA data, servers, daytime minimum load. It's not going to be like to the minute information, if that's what you're asking. It's going to be observed hourly average data over the past year. And so we're taking 8760 data points, and we're utilizing that, and we're taking the minimum or the daytime minimum from there and incorporating that or considering that as our daytime minimum load for the feeder. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. My question, bottom line though, Derek, was at what frequency does your SCADA publish to your server? And so it sounds like you got every hour granularity already. So just using a daytime minimum value seems that there's throughout the day that can change, right? The minimum value can change throughout the day, correct?
Yes, it could change throughout the day.
Okay.
Well, and I wanted to jump in. This is Tony. The automation, the baseline has the frequency in which it updates analog values. So it's actually in there, the SCADA data and the frequency of it under the SCADA section. So it's under a minute.
Described in there?
Yeah, it's under a minute. It gets updates for at the substation level where SCADA is collected.
Right. So I was just, I'm just trying to see what the frequency of the data you currently get, even though your hosting capacity tool only gives a daytime minimum value. So
Stephen, is your question around like having access to more data points than just the daytime minimum load?
Precisely. Yep.
Okay. Why don't we take that back and see what we could do and then get back to you? Is that okay?
I got a presentation from our working group about the value of doing a dynamic hosting tool. So I'd like to present that to the working group. And so, no, that's good though. I just wanted to make sure that you guys have that currently. That way you don't have to add any more functionality. So the business case, you already have the data. So that's good. So.
Okay, I'll put a note down. Great point, Stephen.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Heather?
Thanks, guys.
Oh,
Heather, go ahead.
Cool, thanks. I was going to provide this feedback at some point. I might have raised my hand earlier or later, but I guess I was one of the 18 people. Frankly, only understood what was being showed to me because of Jenny Hall at Energy Trust.
Thank you, Jenny.
But was very, very grateful that PGE is taking this step, and the way Joe just framed like what you want to do with this information is really helpful. It took a lot of mental calculus, and I'm someone who's sort of done this work, not specifically on a project manager of distributed generation engineering level, but who has sort of done things tangential to this work for about 2 years. And I still was like, all right, so minimum daily load means X. That doesn't actually show whether there's capacity at a certain feeder, because it depends on whether the number is positive or negative and whether it shows that that feeder has been upgraded, that substation has been upgraded. So it took a lot of calculus and me asking like 6 or 7 questions to figure out what the map was saying. And I think it was incorporated into your feedback because Jenny was an amazing sort of filter, like, all right, is this what you're asking? But
Yeah.
you know, my hope is for this to make sense to people
Yep.
who don't deal in all of this all the time. And I think
Yes.
you all are well on your way.
Yeah,
Heather,
and
that's
I
it. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
no, that's that is part of, I think, our learning process, which is, I think, from a system perspective, those values are easily consumed by us to make analyses and decisions, and figuring out, you know, how to describe them to others so that they provide equal value to them, is the trick, right? And I think that's what we're learning. And I do think that we've provided a combination of data that used together could say something, but that may just be too much, right? That may be unreasonable to ask of people. So we are, and we talked about this a little bit in responses to some of the feedback, is that we're kind of stepping back and saying, is there a way to simplify that by us combining those data elements into one thing? And in a, you know, our simplest sense, that one thing would be to say, this is DER ready, right? So we'll take those several pieces of data together and say, this substation is DER ready. But even, so when we do that, we're like, well, what does that really mean? So we have to figure out what that means as well. And we want to coordinate that with other utilities. So we need to talk to PAC about that and Idaho Power and say, this is the way we're using this term, and this is what it means to us, and this is what we think it means to you. But we'll have to play that out, right? We'll have to figure out how to pull together that, call it a metric, DER ready, how to represent it on a map, and then what would that mean to you if you were trying to consume it? You would have additional questions, right? But that's what we want to learn.
You know, Joe, I think Heather's point is such a great one, and your point about us being easy, like it's easy for us to just click through the layers and get what we need, but from external perspective, having to go 6 layers deep that's challenging. So Heather, great comment. We have Jason with his hand up, and Oriana would like to see the layers on the with demographics. So let's do Jason's question real quick, and then get to the layers. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jason.
My input is just on the heels of that last comment, and then Joe's response, which made sense to me. At least the approach. It sounds like there's probably a tension between having the granularity. Well, it could be a nomenclature issue too, but I think that right now you've got some great granular data there that can be combined in different, you know, combinations and permutations, depending on, you know, the savviness of who's using it, right? And then on the other side of the spectrum is, you know, doing the work for those, for individuals, or to make it easier for any individual by like, you know, well, I think you suggested just going the full extent and just like summarizing it, creating formulas or whatever it is, and just having output like basically labeled, you know, very intuitively and something very obvious, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So my thought was just, you know, I think in my comments, another way or another idea to balance in there is that might be helpful to getting into the same end goal might be like examples in the user guide that can show how, and I think you had a couple in there, but maybe you know, maybe you try to capture the full range of possible variations on how that data can be combined in examples and flesh those out in the user guide. That might be another way.
Yeah, and it may, you know, I think we approach this with a really broad lens, with a sort of, you know, blue sky, green field. What does this information say? And we may be able to target it, right? And say, well, you know, we can provide this map, but it really only says these 2 things, right? And if your question isn't aligned with those 2 things, then it may not help, right? And that's not to say that you can't use it, but, you know, we can say that the map has a purpose and it's kind of suited for these purposes. And as we get, I think, better, maybe, more granular data, identify layers that have value, then we can maybe, extend the use cases, like what is this good for? But I think it would be valuable, to Heather's point of, kind of narrowing it down and saying, this is what it's good for. And it has a lot of data, but this is what it's good for. I know there's interest in getting into some of the layers. The two that I have highlighted are actually the two that are required in this iteration of the DSP. So in the first submission of the DSP, the request is to provide the illustration of the generation limited feeders. So those feeders that are really constrained with respect to adding more DERs or distributed generation. And the public safety power shutoff areas. So we've got the generation limited feeders in this layer and the public safety power shutoff areas in this layer. So kind of check the box on the minimum requirements of the map this year. And what we did in addition to that was we added data that we already have available through a publication that we do in OASIS. And I don't think that's necessarily important to everybody on the meeting, but OASIS is just an open forum where utilities are required to publish information about their transmission planning and their interconnection queues and some other details. So these two pieces of data, our substations, where they are, these blue squares, and the daytime minimum load information, are available in data that we publish already. And that is just to say that that makes it easy for us to make it public in this map. So it is, I think, valuable to talk about additional data. And then we have to kind of step back and say, can we make that public? How will we make that public? So there's more effort involved if it's not already published. But things like census data, this data that we publish on OASIS, it's public already, we can publish it. And maybe by publishing it in this format, we can extract more value from it than it just being in the spreadsheet on OASIS, right? And that's part of what this discovery process is, right? It's figuring out if there is, if there is value in the way we can show this data. So again, these are a couple of things that we have already, a couple of the features of the map. We can highlight a feeder and see information about that feeder. You can see the specific daytime minimum load for that feeder. What we communicated to folks in the user guide was that this number, this net daytime minimum load, is a rough approximation of how much distributed generation capacity could fit on that feeder, right? And especially if it's not a generation limited feeder. Right, so we can use a couple of these things in combination to get a rough sense of where something will fit. So if I'm a developer and I'm asking myself, can I put a DER, a solar farm out here in this, farmland? Let me look at the closest feeder and see how much capacity is there, right? So there's 2.9 megawatts of capacity on this feeder. Maybe that's a good place to start. That's not a guarantee that, yes, you can put it there, but at least it's a good starting point. So those are some of the basic things that we hope to accomplish by publishing the map. But we also learned that there are areas where this is negative, meaning there's already a lot of generation on that feeder, and then it doesn't give you doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you how much capacity is there because it's already negative. But what you could take away from that negative number is that, well, maybe there's already system protection there, but that's where it gets speculative. And I don't think that's fair for us to say, well, it could mean this and it could mean that. And that's what makes us step back and say, all right, we need to figure out how to communicate what we want to communicate, right? Which is how much capacity is there? Is something ready? And the information that we provided is not a slam dunk. It doesn't do that right off the bat. And that's one of the things that we've learned. And that's why we're stepping back and trying to figure out, well, can we combine these things into one piece of information that is more informative? And that's something we've got in the works right now, and hopefully we'll land on that soon. So I'm going to turn on a couple of these demographic layers. Like, I think, let's just go the heat type rate, right? So what we did was we just pulled some available census data and dropped it in here. What this does, I think in the simplest sense, is it gives everybody an opportunity to say, well, what does it look like if we add layers to this map, right? Is it visually comprehensible? Can I derive any meaning from the data? So I think, again, it's that building the muscle of there's lots of data available. There are things that we can be added as layers, but what does it mean if we actually add it? Can you use it? Yep.
What does heat type rate mean? And how is that demographic data?
It isn't, it's just census data.
Oh, it's just census data. But what is it telling us? What is the heat type rate?
I would ask anyone that is familiar with all the census data. I don't know what the definitions of all these things are. They were actually added like yesterday. So,
okay.
But we could, if we could do the age, 65 or older, we display the layers like this. I think some of the thinking that or analysis that groups want to do is to overlay some of this demographic data with something like hosting capacity analysis to say we have a community, maybe historically underserved community, and there's capacity to connect DERs there. So it may be a good way to say this is a good area to do a demonstration project because we wouldn't have to pay for any upgrades to do something there, right? But I think these are.
So it sounds like what we need to do. So we just layered in the demographics this week. We need to do a mapping of the definition of some of these things.
Yep.
In the next sprint, we'll be asking the larger group, those here on this call, to go through the map and provide some additional feedback. Is that
and I think
fair?
So yes, and those questions I think are, some of it is, I would say, structural in nature. Like, is this a good way to present the data? Regardless of what that data is. So if you were to try and overlay this data with the daytime minimum load, you get something like that, right? Does it get confusing? Does it get messy? If you turn on additional layers, what does that do? Well, they're all the same color, so that you can't turn two on at the same time, right? So we'd have to turn one off. So there are some basic things that we could use help with, like what is a good way to use it or a good way to show it. But then there are also, I think, use case specific, like, well, if I had these two things, like this demographic data and this system data, then I would make this decision. And I would say we don't know all those decisions or all the thinking that people would want to do. So I think there's great value in the team sharing that feedback with us. Like, there is value in these two data points being put on a map.
So there's kind of two things. There's one, help us work out the kinks.
Yep.
And then also, when you're going through this data, tell us what questions you're asking yourself when you're looking through the data, and then provide those questions to us so we can help you answer them.
Yep.
So can we open it up here for people to make questions and comments? And I just want to acknowledge, give a thank you to Jason and Heather for helping answer the question about heating type for me. But do others have questions, comments, or reactions to the map? Nick?
Hey, Joe and Angela, thanks. I just wanted to reflect on something that Joe said earlier, which he noted quickly, but I do appreciate that PGE met the requirements of the guidelines there, with the couple updates to what you were already doing, but just more broadly, appreciate that you guys are going down this path to understand ways to improve it. That is it's great to start the conversation and see where it goes forward here. I just want to acknowledge that additional time and effort you guys are doing on this. Thanks for that.
Yeah, and I guess I would reiterate something I said earlier, and maybe it'll resonate with this information being available, the map being up, which is the intent is to do a hosting capacity analysis, but that's going to take time, right? So let's say we're a year away from having the results of a hosting capacity analysis, and we may be further away from that hosting capacity analysis, providing all the value that everybody wants, which means it may be 2 years away, right, or 3 years away. And I think a driving question for this group and for us is there's got to be a way to provide value in the interim. Like, we do have data. We use it for things. Is it possible to share it in a way that other people could use it too? And like I said, this is data that we do already. The data that we put on the map is data we already publish. So it doesn't necessarily cost more to do it. So I think it's a valuable effort to go through this, let's call it a 2-month exercise of rolling around in this data and figuring out if it says anything, right?
Hey, Joe. So Jenny and Heather both posted comments around being able to export the data. Or is that something that we'll be able to do with this map?
So right now you can export like the layers of data by looking, export to CSV. The map itself does not enable export of shape files, so you couldn't access this map and export a shape file. That would be a different process.
Is that, Jenny, Heather, is that what you're looking for, just a CSV file to create your own mapping and to be able to look at the data? Okay, we got a thumbs up from Heather. Jenny, let us know if you're looking for something different.
And Oriana, you asked just about, looking at some of the layers. Does this scratch that itch, I guess, in the near term?
Oriana, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Sorry, I got booted from for a little bit, but yes, this looks like, just want to commend this as a really interesting and strong resource, echo the exportability. This is a great piece of demographic data to explore in this moment. I'd be curious to see maybe with one of the energy layers as well. For example, like the DER capacity and queue, or daytime minimum load, or something where we can kind of see how that starts to stack up and maybe have some narration on how this interaction would play out in PGE analysis.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the value of having this user group access the map and try and use it. So you could say, I'm so close to answering the question I have, and I can't because X, right? And I think there's value there, right?
Do you know, Oriana, the point that you just made, I think, is a really good one. In our DSP report, if there are questions that people are looking for us to answer, like specific, what does it mean when I layer on the household poverty with the DER capacity queue? Like, what is that data telling us? I think that those are, Joe and Misty, some great questions we could be answering in our narrative, in our report. So Oriana, I will, I'll take that back as a note for us, but I encourage people on the call too, if there's questions that they'd like to have answered, we could look at the data and see what it's telling us and then put some narrative around that in the report. I think that gets to Jason's comment too about having some examples as well. Jason, did you have a question?
You read my mind.
Oh, great, thanks. And then Micah had a great question in the chat. Micah, do you want to ask your question or do you want us to read it?
No, I can talk. I'm wondering if, you've got your various levels within a layer, like on the capacity greater than 1 megawatt. Is it possible to just turn off those layers that you don't want to see so that you can better look at the layers underneath? Or can you maybe rearrange them so you can have the demographic layer on the top but transparent, so that you can really kind of zoom in and, all of the stuff that you don't care about disappears from the map, so that what's highlighted is the data that you want?
So of course the simple answer is yes. And we've actually experimented with that, and it's something we can give you like an option of what that looks like, because we did it early on. We did it before we published the map for anybody else. And in effect, it's like it's adding a layer for every item. Like every item in the group gets its own layer, and then you can mix and match layers as you want. But the challenge there is that you end up with a lot of layers, right? And that's where we were questioning the usability of the map. So we figured we'd take this approach first, get your feedback. If that became an issue, then we could look at going back to that different paradigm of having each item be its own layer, so you could mix and match.
Could you group, if they're all just separate layers, could you still have them grouped so that they roll up in the way they are right now?
We could definitely look at it. Yeah. I mean, we could, if this, and we could also say, this is sort of a, standard approach, right? 5 layers. We can make it 3 so that it's, fewer, right? And because maybe 5 is, more information than is required. But I think that's all valuable, right? If it's like, I think it helps us dial it in, right, and make it a little more useful and usable.
With this new, additional information, I think a third sprint will be valuable. I know there was a question that was put out to the group about whether we should do a third one or not.
Yeah, and I could. I had too many things open. I was going to say I could leave the map up and go through the rest of the hosting capacity analysis slides. See if I can manage that without breaking anything.
So quickly, I just want to I want to ask the question that, and I might have missed this, but Joe, in terms of the map informing our different options, is this what we're intending to use to help inform our option analysis, or is there a different process?
So there's a couple answers to that. So in the approach, in the crawl, walk, run that we illustrated, one of the items is that our plan for hosting capacity analysis may have alternate options for things that add value, right? This is one of those alternatives, right? So let's say our hosting capacity analysis plan says, and I'm just making stuff up. Let's say it costs $2 million to do the basic version of hosting capacity analysis. And that makes everybody step back and say, well, is that valuable enough relative to what we've already looked at, right? So we have this current representation of DER readiness or DG readiness. Does that extra $2 million add value? So this would be an alternative to that. And we could say to go the distance of, let's say, providing real-time hosting capacity is $5 million. And it'll take 4 years. So $2 million in 1 year or $5 million in 4 years. Everybody may say, we could use this in the interim. We'll wait for the real-time hosting capacity analysis in 5 years. So I think that's the calculus. So I think this is an alternative that we're kind of working through. Like we could illustrate it in our initial filing to say, this is what we have today. And here are the options: option 1, option 2, option 3. This is none of those options. As Misty said at the beginning, this isn't a hosting capacity analysis, right? It is system data presented in a way that can support a decision, right?
So
and
can I say that differently? And then we have two questions, and then we probably should wrap up this session with Joe. There's a ton of questions in the chat, so maybe we could answer those in the chat. We'll get to the two questions. I do want to say, I think what we're learning here, correct me if I'm wrong, through the comments that we've received and the feedback, is that maybe the map in terms of how we do hosting capacity, it's serving a different purpose than what we originally intended, or what maybe was originally thought of. And we're seeing that it's expanding when I think that there's multiple purposes. And so if we had an alternative option, it would be one that looks at, okay, what's the feedback we've heard from stakeholders? What are the things that we need to do hosting capacity analysis? And how does this feed into kind of a long-term planning tool for us? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I don't know who had their hand up first, but let's go Jason and then Stephen.
Okay. Thanks for waiting, Stephen. But my question is pretty quick. It's just in response to what Joe just finished saying about kind of the spectrum and the cost benefit, I guess, of the various options of, going the extra mile or gold plating something, I guess, for lack of a better word. But what would that, what are some examples of what's informing that spectrum of options, the values potentially at a high level, Joe? Is it a lot more equipment that would have to be installed to get the data that would be necessary? Or is it formatting or finding clever ways to, do the computations like Heather suggested and flesh it all out in the Apple version of the user interface?
Yeah. all the above. I think Ananth is still on the phone, so this may get a little bit into grid modernization and our long-term planning, but there are capabilities we don't have today, right? So we're implementing our advanced distribution management system right now. It is going to mature over the next few years. So there's our internal ability to manage distributed generation. That's an IT question, as well as sensing and data collection on the grid. So we're investing in that right now. So let's say, we're making that investment. But the fruit of that investment may be a few years down the road from a hosting capacity perspective. So how we turn all of that into a hosting capacity analysis that is real time, right? So if you thought about real-time hosting capacity analysis is really only valuable if you can also attenuate the output of a DER or a collection of a distributed generation resource, right? So does the daytime minimum load matter if you can flexibly manage a distributed generation resource in real time, right? So those distributed generation resources are always responding to grid needs in real time. Then a hosting capacity analysis may not be that valuable, right? If you can control all these resources in real time, then the capacity almost doesn't matter. So that may be the future. So we could say, well, real-time hosting capacity analysis would cost this, but if you could actually do that real-time analysis, then maybe you could control things in real time too. So the analysis itself may not be valuable. So I think those are questions that we're going to get to as we mature, right, internally, and as we grow with our system capability, sensing, what data is available. How do we collect it? Does it make sense everywhere on the grid? Does it make sense in only certain areas of the grid? But I think those are all things that are going to be incumbent on the DSP process in future iterations of the DSP.
Yeah, thanks,
And
Joe. It sounds like it's the probably, just without thinking about it too long, but it seems like one of the biggest variables that'll have an impact on the outcome of those decision trees is time, right? Like how fast does grid modernization come to us?
Right.
You might not know that, but I think the expected timing of, PG's procurement efforts and outlays to get wherever, we may be going is probably the biggest piece of information we would need to help answer that question. What the value is, right?
Yeah, and a lot of those, like that system investment that we're doing for advanced distribution system management and the distributed energy resource management, like those investments contribute to hosting capacity in the long run, right? So we're dependent on those in some ways. So that long-term plan for advanced hosting capacity is contingent on some of these other investments and the value they deliver. And Ananth or Derek, if you want to slam on the brakes because I've gone too far, go ahead.
So let's go to Stephen and then wrap up this session.
Yep.
But Joe, can you and Misty go into the chat and help answer some of the questions after we answer Stephen's question?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Yeah, so just another clarifying question with the current data you guys have. Are you guys using a forecasting tool for circuit loads? And maybe possibly add, okay, well, this image that we're seeing right now on the screen, if you could put some temporalness to this layer and say in 2 years, this is what or in 20 minutes even, this is what this circuit's going to look like. Do you guys have a forecasting tool? It sounds like the Opus One is kind of a load forecast, but just wondering if you guys do have a forecast.
I'll say a couple things and then I'll let Derek, correct anything I said. So a lot of the load planning, a lot of the distribution planning we do is reactive, right? It's in response to the load forecast at the system level. So we do a load forecast at the system level. And Derek's team does a lot to translate into a load forecast at the distribution level. So how do you translate that into each feeder and substation? And then you look at, maybe potential pockets of load growth, like is there a new neighborhood here? Is there a new business opening here, which affect that load forecast? But they're really in response to things that we know. We do some forecasting, but to date, we don't use it as a sort of an investment tool, simply because those forecasts are very suspect. Things change pretty rapidly at the distribution level, like how things are actually implemented. And the timelines for doing the things that we would forecast, like a substation build, are long, right? Or a feeder extension. Like those things take 2 to 5 years. So the forecast has never been stable enough to enable us to use it as a actual investment tool. Derek, do you want to add any color to that?
Sure. So load forecasting that we currently perform is not necessarily the preferred bottom-up approach. It's a top-down approach still, and so we're taking a forecast at a more of a system level, and in a sense trickling it down to the transformer level. And as far as planning studies are concerned, then we're trickling that down just to the feeder level themselves. And so when it comes to a tool like this and the data that we currently have, it's something that we will want to consider like well into the future. But for this particular map and what we're looking to achieve here is really just scratching the surface on what we consider a hosting capacity map could look like. So yeah, I do appreciate your inquisitiveness when it comes to system data and the granularity of data. We're working towards getting more granular with our data, and that is definitely something that we would want to incorporate in the future.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, because that's kind of, that'll lead into my educational piece that I'm talking about with Angela. So I'll incorporate that so you guys can have a little bit of perspective on currently what's going on, that you guys can have an option to discuss, like Joe was saying. So there's options out there. So getting that on the table is the first step. Thanks.
So Joe, are we able to transition? Because I think a lot of the conversation where it's heading will be covered in the long-term plan. So he wants to talk about how do we envision hosting capacity and baseline data and the locational forecasting that we'll be doing to help with distribution planning, how that all kind of fits into a bigger tool, a suite of tools that we'll be discussing.
Yeah, let's switch back to the slide deck.
Great.
And I'll wrap up I'll stop sharing and wrap up this hosting capacity discussion.
1 second.
So I touched on this a little bit, but what we learned so far, it's been extremely valuable for us. It really makes you get questions that you just simply didn't see coming, right? And it has really made us pause and think about the representation of the data. So that's invaluable to us. Things we need to do, we need to change it from DER to something like DG. So that has been suggested along the way, and that's probably a direction we're going. We are actually also thinking about something fancy, like giving it an acronym that does not speak to DG or DER, but just makes it some sort of decision support tool, right? Because I think in the long term, that's what the intent is, to provide data in a way that supports decision making. So this is just an iteration of that, and maybe we provide a name that's something more forward looking. I talked about DER readiness, so aggregating some of the data we have into an indicator that says this is ready. We found in the process that we've got holes in our data. So the data that we've published in OASIS has some gaps in it, and we need to fill those gaps. And providing other data sets. So as you can see, we've added data sets to the map. We don't know if they're the right data sets, if they're presented correctly. So that's something we need to work on. And the map is good for having this conversation. So jump to the next slide. We've got a couple of decisions that we wanted to make. So determine whether or not to have a third sprint. I think Misha's said yes. So I think that's the right answer. So we're basically going through the process of incorporating feedback we got in sprint 2, preparing those release notes that we'll send out next Monday. We'll send it out to the technical working group. And then I think post sprint 3, we'll publish the map for broader DSP review. And I think there's still a value question there, right? So this third bullet, determine whether the current map provides sufficient value to publish for public consumption. It needs to be intuitive, it needs to serve a purpose, and it can't generate 1,000 questions, because I think that would defeat the purpose. That would sink this small PGE team, and we wouldn't be able to respond to that level of feedback. And so when I talk about maybe narrowing the purpose and being really specific about what it does, that can solve some of that problem. And then also open the possibility for continuing to explore the addition of data and the addition of value over time. We need to execute the HCA pilot so that we can get a handle on what it's going to cost to do that iteratively over time. and present that in the first submission of the DSP. And as Angela said, it's due in a few months, so we got to start writing. And all of this work that we've been doing will factor into that writing. So with that, I don't think I have anything else.
Okay. And I want to ask, so is it Misha or Micah? Did I pronounce your name wrong? I'm so sorry if I did.
It's Misha.
Okay, my apologies. I will mental note to make sure I say it right. Okay, well, thank you so much, Joe. There's a ton of conversation in the chat. I think that just shows a third sprint is warranted for this. So we'll continue efforts on trying to refine the map and address some of the comments within the chat.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, so the next section is to go over our baseline data and system assessment. Tony, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call. Good morning. I'm Tony Grentz. I'm a distributed resource planning engineer. And if you go to the next slide, I can probably get us some time back. Last month, we covered version 0. I'm going to show you version 1 of the spreadsheet. And I was going to show you the map, but in the interest of time, I think you've seen it's the exact same layers that Joe went over. So nothing has changed. So I can probably skip over that or just can show you quickly. It does need a little bit of work because they have dark colors showing the feeders, but I'll get to that in a second.
Sorry, Tony, are you on video? Because on my screen, you're showing up as just a black screen.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It doesn't matter if you are or not, but I just.
Oh, I thought I was on video.
Can other people see him? Maybe it's just me.
We cannot.
Oh, okay. Black screen. Well, I joined as the DSP meeting, not the personal one. That's probably why you're not seeing me. So I can either go off and come back or just keep going.
Yeah, no worries. Just you can take your video off and I'll just go through the slides.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Okay. We, like Angela was saying, I haven't received any feedback concerning the baseline spreadsheet or the map yet. So any information would be helpful on that. And in the May workshop, yeah, we talked about the demographics and socioeconomics. So it's something that we can possibly work on with Oregon Department of Energy, PacifiCorp. We can see if we can collaborate and find out some more information. Next slide.
And we'd like Idaho Power. So PacifiCorp actually reached out to us initially, and then Odo did as well. But we think a bigger conversation, even with Idaho Power, would be great. So if anyone's on the call from Idaho Power, we welcome you to join us in that.
Okay, and then we're going to go into some of the metrics. So these are some of the things. I wanted to share my screen first to show the version 1 of the spreadsheet. So, okay, I'm sharing it. Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Okay. So this is exactly same as the version 0. The only thing you're going to see is you're going to see a bunch of data visuals in these tabs, and we're going to cover a number of these. So there, not all of them made it into the PowerPoint, but you can download this. I think it'll be available tomorrow or the next day. We'll have everything available for download. We'll be a little bit quicker this month. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the presentation. Okay, so the first metrics are outage metrics. So SAIDI, KD, SAFI, MAFI. I just wanted to just briefly go over what they mean. So SAIDI, S-A-I-D-I, the AI and I, average interruption and index, it's the same for the other 4 metrics, the AI and I in all of them, and SAIDI, KD, SAFI, MAFI. Down here, it indicates SAIDI and KD are outage duration metrics, and those are in minutes. And then you also have your major event days. Now, the major event days are going to be like we talked about the fire season last year, there were 4 days that were considered MEDs. And this year, when we had the ice storms, which aren't shown in these metrics, those will be in the 2021, but there were 12 days that were considered MEDs, so the separation of the metrics. So you can think of like SAIDI, a description of SAIDI. If you have one SAIDI, that means 1 minute of outage time, and it's for every customer in our service territory. Every customer, meaning everyone that's metered and gets a bill. You can think of SAFI as one SAFI is 1 outage per customer in our service territory. The KD number is strictly customer. They went down and how long did it take? And you just, it's simple division to get that. And the MAFI is momentary. It's a momentary frequency, the F for frequency. So you have your duration and frequencies. So MAFI, that momentary metric is defined as momentary is 5 minutes or under. And the other 3 metrics, SAIDI, KD, and SAFI, are sustained outage metrics, which means they're over 5 minutes. And that is the outage metrics that we use for 4.1.b, I believe it was. Are there any questions about these metrics? Then I would move along to the next slide. The next one was average asset, average life. So here's all the assets that we have listed, and what you're looking at stacked, the 41 and the 7, is the service life average. So for just a distribution pole, there's a average service life of 41 plus 7, 48 years total. 41 is the actual average of what we have right now for distribution poles, and the remaining is the top portion, the 7. And then here's the rest of the assets. The next slide works with this slide that you're looking at right now, but it does it in percent. So if you move to the next slide, so that 41 for distribution pole is 81% of the service life, and the 15% is the remaining, the 7. And that's how you read these graphs. Now the next slide, you have now the distribution poles. It was 41 was the average, but as you can see, if you break them up every 10 years into buckets, you can see that it has a nice little distribution. So it explains the story in a more granular level. And then next to it is substation transformers, and it shows that by buckets of 10 years. Next slide. And then, yeah, our SCADA numbers. We currently have our substations with 81% of SCADA and 19 without. Next slide. And then our meters from all our customers, the breakout of residential, commercial, industrial, irrigation, and vacant. Next slide. Here's the financials, and yeah, they're stacked on top of each other. So there's the buckets that we have, and yeah, self-explanatory. This one, the distribution spending by category. And I have to say, in 2020, we have quite a significant increase in new customer projects. That's the one glaring thing that caught my eye. I would go to the next slide.
Customer projects mean? Sorry to interrupt, but what does that mean?
That is something I would have to take up with our corporate planning to understand what that exactly means. Yeah, I haven't got a chance to talk with our corporate planning yet to just describe that bucket of information of why it increased so much.
Well, what does new customer projects mean specifically? Do you know, Tony?
It's defined in one of their tabs. I'd have to look it up.
Okay, but it's in the workbook?
It's in the workbook of the raw data, which we have. It wasn't included in this version, so it's part of what I was going to write in the working streams.
And Tony, is this the way that these categories are designed? Is this, so I'm just recalling from memory, and Angela, sorry, I'll come back to you. But there was a docket or something along those lines that defined how we would define financials. Like we have an agreement with the PUC. There was a larger effort to redefine these cost allocations or then the dollars. Is that right?
Yeah, in 2019, we had, there's a slight variation from, we talked about that in, I believe, the March meeting.
Okay, so it's probably aligned with whatever came out of that docket. Angela, go ahead. I'm sorry I cut you off.
Well, it's hard for us to follow along when we don't understand what this means. And I don't have the link to the workbook. I don't remember it being in any of, I'm like trying to look back in the emails you all have sent to find this workbook.
This is on the website, the DSP website, under month 5 and month 6 for this month. It'll be
Okay.
posted in the next couple of days.
Okay, so it's not posted yet. So how are we supposed to know what new customer projects means?
That's part of my, go ahead, Angela.
So Angela, we went over the data last month and posted it on the website last month for people to review. And then this month, Tony has gone through and updated the graphs. I don't know, were graphs part of it? Was it just the raw data last month?
Well, this was the raw data, and then it was also the socioeconomic. I spent a lot of time tracking down the demographics and socioeconomic
Okay, so
information as well.
So last month we presented the spreadsheet, we posted online. This month, Tony has incorporated feedback he heard from last month. And so what we should probably do, Angela, I think the point that you're making is a great point, that we should understand this data ourselves. So I'll take that back to make sure that when we go through and we present, we actually understand what each of these categories are. Is there other things you'd like to add in your initial reaction to this?
Well, I'm looking back through all of the emails you sent. I don't have a link to the website. I don't remember being asked to comment on this, and it's possible I missed it. We're also in legislative session. So if you could post the link to the website in the chat so that I can even.
Yeah, so it's in the
Sure, I'll do it.
slides. It's in the slides as well from this month, but yeah, Tony, you'll post it?
Early in the presentation, but.
Great feedback. I think that that's fair. Angela, we'll get you an answer. So Tony will dig in and we'll get you an answer during this meeting and post it in the chat on what new customer projects are. And also we'll post not just the link to the website, but we'll send out, Shadia, can you make a note? We'll send out an email to let people know when the data has been posted to the website and where it's located.
I am expecting that tomorrow, once everything goes back, goes into the website, everybody will have access to the video recording that we're currently doing, the PDF of the PowerPoint presentations, the data, and I think anything else that we might have. But I think those are the 3. And I think we have a page of acronyms, a 2-pager of acronyms as well that you would have access to.
And Shadia, can we send out an email just letting people know?
Yeah.
Okay,
we send a thank you email tomorrow with all that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shadia. Oriana, or I'm sorry, Angela, before we move to Oriana, do you have other comments or questions?
Well, I guess I'm not sure how this got lost. It could have been my fault as well, but I don't see anything on this distribution system planning page about the baseline and the whatever we were supposed to give comments on. Like, I don't know where that is on this.
Yeah, Angela, it's a fair point. Why don't we just go quickly to the website and walk the people through? We did this really quickly last month. So it's worth just let's just take a couple minutes to walk through this to show people where things are. So let me get my screen back up and running. Okay, so our website is portlandgeneral.com. /DSP. And so it takes us to our site here. We have some just basic information about what distribution system planning is. We've asked people to get involved and then have some information on the PUC's technical working group, as well as how to get involved, both, well, get in touch with us, and then how to get involved in different parts of the project that we're working on. So this is the Google form that Shadia mentioned earlier, where you can say what specifically is of interest to you. Are you interested in hosting capacity? Are you interested in community engagement? So we can make sure that you're informed. Has all of our meeting information, so if you can't find it, it's always located here with the most recent meeting. And then when you go down to past meeting materials, this is where we have the previous workshop. We have an archive of the meeting. This will typically be what we post, the different archives, and then anything that we've presented in terms of the presentation and anything that we would ask for feedback on. So for this month, Nihit will show the report template. We'll post it in workshop 6, and then we'll ask for feedback on that report template. So very similar to last month. And let me just say, if this process doesn't work, we totally will adjust our process to make sure that it's easy for everybody. But this is what we tried last month. If you click on your baseline data, you can download the spreadsheet, and that will give you access to the spreadsheet that, or the workbook that Tony just showed. And then once you have comments and feedback, you can email us. So our email is up here. Or you can, I don't think we have a Google form to collect feedback, but maybe we could do that as well. But, is that helpful, Angela?
It is, although I guess kind of my earlier comment that it wasn't clear that comments were needed on that thing and where to find it and what the deadline was. So I know other folks have comments, so we can move on to them.
You know, Angela, there is no rush in collecting comments. So right now there is no hard deadline. We can still incorporate feedback. So why don't we send out an email, Shadia, with all of the information to collect feedback on the baseline data. We will make sure all of the different graphs are labeled and clearly able to be able to identify what specific things are, data points are. And we'll send that out, and we can collect any comments through the end of this month. Would that give you enough time?
Yes, that would be helpful.
Okay, so we'll come back then to baseline data. Why don't we just extend the comment period and come back and share baseline data, feedback, and comments next month. And I think because we didn't get any feedback, you were not the only one who's confused on this process. So I will just say that I'm sure others would appreciate some additional time. Oriana?
Yeah, I want to first show appreciation for just your willingness to receive feedback and be flexible about how this work is communicated, but do want to express some of the same frustrations as Angela. It doesn't feel like good process to me to just post information on the website and expect everyone to be constantly checking it. My recommendation and request would be 2 things. One, anytime you are including something in the slides that has a link on the website, it would be helpful if you drop that link in the chat just so folks don't have to scramble to go find it. And secondly, anytime there's a change on the website, a request for comments or new information that's posted, I know it's laborious on your end to do this, and you might be able to set up an automated website update that goes to the distribution list, but being flagged when comment periods open, when new information is posted, would be incredibly helpful. I know everybody here is really, really busy, including the folks facilitating, but those little things that you do to make it easy for folks to engage is good practice, not just for this group, but thinking about the community work that you're doing. You sometimes have to go above and beyond to help folks have easiness in accessing and engaging with information for process to feel meaningful and for folks to really engage. And I think you've hit on the lack of comments that have come through as perhaps other folks having a similar confusion about the desire to receive feedback, which is also very, very welcome and appreciated.
Yeah, I agree with you on making it easy. It's really easy for us to find all this stuff because we live in it all day. But being able to communicate that out to others, I think is important. And so I like your idea of posting things in the chat. We could also follow up with an email. Shadia, Tony, can we check to see if we can get an automatic, like anytime the website's updated, if people want to be informed of those changes, they could opt into that?
Yeah, so maybe this would be a good time to ask everybody. I maybe a poll would like help with that. Is everybody okay getting a bunch of emails from us? Because I don't want to get you guys all fatigued every time that we do anything and then flood you with emails. It's like a pretty large mailing list, and I want to be respectful of the amount of information that we sent you. Are you guys, maybe I will create a poll right now and ask, how often do you think you would be okay being emailed a month?
And you can feel free to throw that in the chat or to speak up.
What about like a weekly, this is Jason, I don't know if it matters. What about a weekly, like, summary, you know, if of the updates or whatever that's transpired across the week or something, instead of every time there's a change or something? I don't know.
That sounds good.
We could definitely follow up each meeting with specific things that we've asked for feedback on. So we make sure that, and then we could send the link to where those things are. And then if anything happens in addition to that, Jason, I like your idea of just trying to consolidate those. And if we have enough for a weekly update, we would send those out.
I will create a question on the feedback form right now for you guys to add your preference on how often would you like to receive information from us. So when you submit the survey on how did we do today, please let us know what is your preference, and we would try to accommodate as best as we can.
Hey, Angela, on a tangential note on this, so it sounds like you haven't got a lot of feedback to the DSP domain email. And so I'm curious though, like, how are you guys responding to the questions and comments you do have? Are you guys just taking it internally and just keeping it? Are you responding back to individual commenters?
Yeah, so Stephen, sorry, the comment around not getting any feedback was specific to the baseline data. We have been getting people emailing us through the email box, and we respond back to them directly. And then any comments that we hear within the meeting, we try to track those, we include them in our meeting notes, and then we try to address them in the following meeting. So you might hear throughout the meeting, we'll say things like, we heard this in the last meeting, and as a result, we've added it to, like, the hosting capacity is a good example. Most of the teams are collecting. So when I say teams, each of the work streams for the DSP has been assigned to a specific subject matter expert. And so each of those teams are tracking all of the comments in Excel or OneNote, whatever their preference is. And our plan is, once we've collected all the feedback and we've gotten to a place where those specific work streams are finalized and ready to be put in the DSP, is that each section of our report will have how we've addressed comments and what comments we've heard. So for Tony's stuff, we didn't, the baseline data and system assessment, we haven't gotten any feedback. And I think at this point, Tony, really my thought is being able to share out this spreadsheet and get people's comments on those. We could go through the end of this month and then come back next month with what we've heard. Tony heard in the last meeting some suggested changes, so he did update the spreadsheet with some graphics that were specific around socioeconomics and demographics and things like that. Tony, were there other updates that you heard in the last meeting that you made changes to the spreadsheet on?
No, no, that was the major one.
Okay.
The rest of it was just getting data visuals because they just had data and they had no visuals. So this month was supposed to show them visuals of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an awesome point, Angela. I didn't know that global spreadsheet of questions broken out into domain experts was being captured. So maybe that's something you could publish to the website, because I don't want to ask a question that's already been asked and answered by a domain expert. And so not knowing or having any insight into those global, bucket of questions, that would be very helpful as well per domain expert.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I would also, though, encourage, like, if the question's already been asked and it's still a question for you, please ask it again.
Yeah.
Everybody has a different way of understanding material, and so
Cool.
we don't mind diving deep into subjects. Yeah, okay, I'll put that down, Stephen. Thank you. That's a good idea. I think we are at a good place where we could post the feedback we've gotten from hosting capacity, but I'll talk to Joe and Misty on that. And then to wrap up this section of our presentation, I think, Tony, what would be good at this point is for you to maybe just take a couple minutes and walk through the spreadsheet again, just to give people a general understanding of how it's laid out. And then we will come back next month with the visuals and some of the key learnings and feedback that we heard in the baseline data. Does that sound like a good process?
Sure.
Okay, I'll let you share your screen. Do you have it open or do you want me to open it?
If you'd open it, yeah, I closed mine.
Okay, let me just pull it up here. Okay. So can everybody see it okay?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Okay, so the first tab of this is the table of contents. It allows, there's hyperlinks. If you click on the hyperlinks, you can go back and forth to this page. And these are all the requirements under baseline. And all the pages are laid out the same. They have the requirements on the upper left. They have the hyperlink to go back to the table of contents below. And then there's some graphs below that. And the data charts are the data information is off to the right. So
can I just point out, you've highlighted, so in the key here, each resource or each category is highlighted. So if you're interested in electric vehicles, you could just scroll down to that section and click on it. And then you have the requirements up here. Is that what so that's where you were at, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then go ahead, Tony, and tell me how you want me to manage.
So I would go back to the table of contents and I'd go to the bottom and we'll go through the tabs one at a time. So just click on them. So the first tab, 4.1.A.I and 2, this is information to do with distribution forecasting. And it's all written, and this is a source from Derek Harris. The next tab over B is going to get into outage metrics. Oh, the next one is the A.3. That's your outage metrics, the ones that I showed some of
the graphs on.
Yeah,
the graphs in here. Oh, this is not the updated. I pulled this from the website,
yeah,
so it's not the updated
the May one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So what Tony did. So what's on the website now does not have the graphics, but that will be updated. But this one doesn't. This is just the raw data. So in the next one, it'll have the raw data and the graphics. Okay.
So you have your outage information, and then there's the definitions and equations below that describe all this information. There's a request to shrink the view.
Yes. Jason, are you calling me old because I have to have it in 100-point font? Is that better, Jason?
So yeah, here are the definitions talking about outage metrics. And the major event day has the equation and the definition as well. The next one is the asset information requirements. And so again, like I said, all these tabs follow the same format. Requirements, upper left, back to the table of contents. In version 1, you'll have the below table of contents, you'll have the graphs, and the data is off to the right. So SCADA, here's some information about substation of, it actually lists out the data of what substations actually have SCADA. And then the percentages are there, and there's some information to the lower left. You can see SCADA type. It has how frequently it updates information. That's one of the requirements, C.IV.
And I think this answers some of the questions Stephen had earlier.
Yeah,
about
he was talking about, yeah.
Okay. So, so Tony has gone through each of the data requirements. I'm going to stop sharing this because I think I feel like the tutorial of the spreadsheet, we should be good on that. But if others would like to walk through other tabs, let me know and we can continue to do that. But you can see the way that Tony's laid out the data with the requirement, and then what the specific requirement is, and then the data that we have. And he's tried to filter it through so you have a sense of what the data is telling you. But we really, I think what we're asking for, and Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, what we're really hoping for here is that to get feedback, is the data useful? Are there things here that you would like to see? Are there different ways we could show the data that would be useful for you? Tony, other things that you would like feedback on?
Well, we're about to start our writing streams to write the reports. So yeah, if you want to see data talked about in a certain fashion, we're about to start writing at the end of this week, starting next week, we're starting our writing stream. So this is the time to get comments because we're going to start writing.
Other questions around baseline data? And is this helpful?
Tony, do you want to show that the effort that you put this month on having the social data layered into the map?
Oh, Joe,
even though
already
it's still,
did it. I can show it, sure, if they want.
I think it would be valuable to show the effort. And also we would be posting that for people to provide their feedback on how can we improve the use of this map.
So I'm sharing my screen.
This is a separate map from the hosting capacity map. This shows the baseline data that we have, but it has the same layers as the hosting capacity map from the census data. Is that correct, Tony?
That is correct, but this requirement is only in the net metering and qualified facility section. So it's not all the data, baseline data. It is just the net metering and qualified facility. So when I was answering no last time, I thought that was getting to the point of it was asking for more than just what the requirement was, which we can do, but the requirement is in the section, this map, only for net metering and qualified facilities.
So this map today meets the minimum requirements. I would love to have it go beyond just the minimum requirements. So even feedback on the map on what would be useful for people and looking at this would be good feedback for us to receive. And so can you show us, Tony, what we're looking at here?
Sure. So we'll go for qualified facilities. So this is, I can click on a polygon and see this represents a feeder area. So when you click on it, it tells you the feeder Cornelius Verbort. It gives you the total count in the feeder area, not site specific. So there's 37 net metering facilities in this feeder area, and it gives the nameplate generation capacity for net metering, and then it does the same thing for qualified facility, and then you have a total between the two. And it's the same everywhere you click. And you have a key off to the side. It's color coded by the amount of generation. So it can give you a density profile. But I went to qualified facility, but if you go to net metering, it's dark and it's hard to read. So yeah, we'd have to do some transparency. There's going to be some things that we can do better, or maybe we can put lines through them, or we'll have to do something a little bit different because it's kind of hard to read when you start doing multiple layers. But same thing with the qualified facilities. It's actually going to show this is Yamhill substation, Yamhill 13 feeder. This is the area that feeder handles. And then it gives you all the information, the total count of net metering, qualified facility, and the total between the two. And then mixed in that is you're going to get, now we have the census data. Household 200% below the poverty line. So getting that to mesh by layers is going to be a challenge. And so like you said, like Joe was saying, we just got this the other day. We literally just got our GIS team to give this to us, so we haven't got to play with it very much. But yeah, but we have it, and then I'll have to make this available for feedback. And then we'll have to put that in the email as well, access to this. People who already, some people have access, other people don't. And if they want access, they'll have to email dsp@pgn.com, but that will be in the email, and request access and we can tell them what information they'll have to give to get access.
Yeah, and we had a group in the main meeting that spoke up. There was several of you that said you'd be interested in having a conversation around how demographic data gets integrated into baseline data. We see that also as being important for hosting capacity. We have a list of those names already. But if you would like to be part of that group, just let us know or fill out the Google form that Shadia placed online. Why don't we take a quick 4-minute break? We'll come back at 11:20 and get into our long-term plan. And then if others have questions around the map or the baseline data, throw it in the chat and we'll get back to you that way. Does that sound good? Just a quick bio break for those who need it. All right. Thank you for those that gave a thumbs up. We'll see you guys at 11:20. Hey, Nahit, are you on the call?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Hi. It's almost lunchtime. I just want to point out that I noticed that you're wearing a polo shirt. You dressed up for this meeting.
Yeah, I figured I'm talking about a meaty topic, so try to distract from it,
So are we done with baseline?
Yes, sorry, Tony.
Okay,
Yeah,
just double checking.
Yeah, can you we'll put some time on the calendar for next month to go over the baseline data stuff.
Okay.
Again. Yeah, thank you for being flexible. Okay, so Nahit, do you want to introduce yourself and jump in?
Yeah, sounds good. Hello, everyone. My name is Nahit Shah. I am a senior analyst at PGE, and I am hoping to share with you PGE's kind of vision as a part of our long-term plan. And so to create our vision, if we can move to the next slide, we start by looking at some drivers. The largest of these drivers is the penetration of DERs. Andy Iden has spoken about the impact of DERs and the expected forecast of different DERs over the last few months, underscoring the impact that a change is required in the distribution system in order to accommodate those DERs. This graph kind of represents the energy need for behind the meter DERs. This is net of solar, storage, and flexible resources, which have their own distinct needs that they sort of demand of the distribution system, whether those are telecommunication needs, whether those are hardening needs or interconnection needs and the like. Therefore, PGE, in order to sort of create a vision for the future, at a minimum needs to evolve the distribution system as a way to meet these DERs. So this is kind of our first driver of change. In addition to this, if we can move to the next slide, we have a couple other key drivers as well. Just moving from left to right here, the first driver is advancing PGE's public commitments. These include our commitments to decarbonization, sustainability, and inclusiveness. And a third driver that we see in all of this is advancing public policy and all the stakeholder needs.
So really quickly before you jump in, Angela and Heather both have a question around DERs specifically. And what I can like to point out is that I think this is the total, let me go back to this slide. This is the total magnitude of all DERs, and it includes, Nahit, correct me if I'm wrong, it does include flexible loads. It includes renewables.
Yeah, it is net of flexible loads, solar, EVs, and all the DERs as defined in the docket, right? So this is the aggregate impact. And each of those DERs have their own requirements, right? Like EVs could require a higher capacity charging requirements at certain substations. Solar might require advanced protection at certain substations, right? So that each of those have their individual requirements, but this is just a way to look at the aggregate impact of all DER. So this is not excluding any DER.
So it does include net metering.
Yes, it does.
Okay, and so we do have slides, Angela and Heather, that break out. Last month, Andy Iden presented the breakout of the draft results for the kind of gets more granular to this slide. We should have final results here in the next couple months. So I think that Andy's going to come back next month and show the specific pieces of like how much net metering do we expect, how much energy storage. So you can refer back to the website with his slides from workshop 5, but know that we'll also present the final results in the near future too.
Yeah.
But so Nahit, your point with this is that you're taking that data and using that to inform your long-term plan.
Yeah, and so it's kind of one of the primary drivers, right? Like to be able to accommodate these DERs, we need to upgrade the system, right? Like that's the reactive aspect of all of this. We are forecasting several different DERs. This is just one slide that shows the aggregate impact You can see all of those different load forecasts in the previous meetings, and you can see the specifics there. This is also an energy slide, so it's not talking about peak capacity or anything like that. This is just to show you an aggregate impact of behind the meter DERs.
And one more question, and then Misha has a question in the chat, and Jason has his hand up. Angela, Heather, does that answer your question? I want to point out he's using the aggregate here, but he's going to be looking at individual renewables, energy storage, EVs. So it'll be the overview as well as a granular look. Okay, if that doesn't answer your question, feel free to speak up. Do you want to answer the question in the chat?
Yeah, the question is, how do those forecasts compare to load growth, and what percentage will come to DERs? The forecasts comparison to load growth and talking about its kind of comparison between like economic related load growth and DER forecasted load growth is not the core of what we are trying to discuss here. So I can get you an answer to that, but I think that for this discussion, we should kind of focus on the distribution system and the impacts to the distribution system and how we are kind of reacting to that.
Thank you. I was just curious. Probably a tangential conversation.
Yeah.
To be. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that
Jason?
should be. I know that will be a question that's going to be answered in the IRP too. So we'll have. We'll definitely continue the discussion on that. Sorry, Jason.
Yeah. So Joe, I think, talked about the value of the hosting capacity map, and I was wondering what your thoughts on the value of your forecast here kind of being a variable that might feed into that. For example, like if this forecast is, aggressive or conservative or just risky, we don't know, like unknown, right? Maybe I'll just stop there. That's enough, but just wanted to flag that and just see what the reactions to that thought were.
Yeah, Jason, I think there are a couple questions in there, right? The first is what is the use case of the forecast? The forecast provides a lot of insight, which is why it was one of the first pieces that we started working on. A forecast tells us, and this forecast will eventually become a bottom-up forecast, right? Like as Andy Iden has been talking about over the last few months. Through that bottom-up forecast, we can identify which locations are more likely to see DER penetration and understand which substations and which equipment would need upgrading in the short term versus the long term, right? So that's one angle of it. Another angle of it kind of tells us that if we want to have hosting capacity and we see that solar penetration is really going to ramp up, let's just take an example, say 2040, then do we need hosting capacity until 2040? Right. So those kinds of pieces of information can be kind of extracted from the forecast. And so there are many different use cases that we are considering. But does that answer the core of your question?
Jason, you're on mute if you're talking, but I'll just add that, yes, we consider the forecast to be an important aspect when we look at hosting capacity, when we look at distribution planning in general, when we look at non-wire solutions, when we think of our baseline data and trends and changing over time. We think of it also in how to best integrate demographics and socioeconomics into our programs. Looks like Jason dropped off, but
yeah.
We see this as being a critical component, like Nihit said, to other work.
Yeah. The other side of this is we will be updating the forecast on a regular basis. With each update, we'll also update assumptions, we'll have better calibration, and all of those will lead to better outcomes, especially in the short run, with lower variation in the long run, right? And that's the goal of any forecast. And so we are looking to make that inherent in this process. Next slide. As we just the previous slide for just one moment.
Just go advance.
And the previous slide, sorry.
Oh. Oh no, sorry. There you go.
Yeah. So, kind of bringing back the conversation to the long-term plan, we see three large drivers, right? We see the forecast, we see our public commitments, and we see public policy all kind of converging together as sort of primary drivers, and their respective goals kind of setting the stage for what the vision needs to be. And so the vision, which is the next slide, please, is focused on how PGE will sort of view the distribution and the sub-transmission system over the next 10 years. And so I'm going to take a minute here to talk about what that really means. Fundamentally, PGE's vision for the distribution and sub-transmission system is one where PGE will further continue to partner with communities and modernize the grid to empower customers through community-inspired and innovative products and services that will enable the clean energy transition in a fair and equitable manner. And so what I want to draw attention to is the community-inspired and innovative products and services. The central focus of products and services is because we believe that we can create additional products on the distribution system that help meet customers' specific energy needs as a way to ensure that they are empowered in their clean energy transition. And what I mean by products and services, so if you look at some of the work PGE has done historically, our green future choice renewable power program is a great example of a product, right? Our energy partner program is a great example of a product. Our work with Energy Trust for energy efficiency is a great example of energy efficiency related products. And so we think about these products as our current state, and we see these products kind of expanding beyond its current state to a new state where we are able to address specific customer needs. We believe that to both create these products and realize their full value stack, we have 4 crucial pillars that enable that future. The first of which is empowered communities. I'll go into the next slide kind of defining what each of these mean, but functionally we believe that having communities be a central tenet of our vision is key to the success of what we are trying to achieve that was highlighted in the previous slide. The next pillar that we've highlighted is a modernized grid. We know that in addition to having empowered communities, we need a grid that is modernized, that can optimize at a level for all customers, therefore delivering value for everybody. And I'll get into more detail on the next slide again. The third pillar we have is called plug and play. This is where we want to ensure that people can connect onto the distribution system with relative ease and have access to grid edge products in a way that is accessible to everyone, right? And this we believe will accelerate and reduce barriers and accelerate the clean energy transition using distributed resources. Finally, we also believe that there needs to be a broader evolution that's kind of beyond PGE, right? Like that involves the PUC and stakeholders and society at large, where we see different cultural barriers, different rules, different regulations, all of which that need to evolve as a way to enable this future, right? So while most of it kind of falls on us and us kind of enabling a lot of it, a part of it also falls on the broader community and the broader ecosystem that enables all of this process. All right. So to define each of these pillars in more detail, if we can move to the next slide, please. We have created the following definitions. And by empowered communities, what we are functionally focusing on is ensuring there is equitable access to everyone in the clean energy transition. Right. That's fundamental to a lot of what we are trying to do. It's kind of obvious from the utility standpoint. Having everybody included in flexible load programs helps us create robust portfolios, helps with some economies of scale and things like that. But more importantly, it ensures that customers have access to different technologies, right? Like we have issues associated with tenants in multifamily buildings who don't have access to certain products because of a split incentive issue, whether that is on energy efficiency or demand response. We have all of these different issues that we want to overcome those barriers. And as we overcome those barriers, we'll ensure that customers can see the value on their end, while the system can see the value as well.
Can I just take a moment here to open it up to our partners? This is, I see as being critical for feedback on when we look at how we want the DSP. Like, what do we, and we've talked a lot about this internally, like, what do we want as a team for the DSP? Where do we see the opportunities and the potential for this plan to go? We really took a long time to develop what is the vision. And it seems like it's a very simple process, but it took us a long time to kind of settle on one that was community centered, that has a purpose and a sense of place, and being able to figure out, like, not only do we want a vision, we need a strategy, and we need the pillars, the tactical things that are going to help us get to those things. And so this is where we really need the partners' help, is to make sure that we've got it right, because this will frame up the entire report. And not just the entire report, but we also envision that this is an opportunity for us to start to shape how do the other efforts that we're doing across the organization fit into distribution planning, like our transportation electrification plan, interconnection, our products and programs for demand response and flex loads, things like that. So, and he's been working across the company to ensure that we have buy-in in this kind of broader vision, and that these tactical pillars feed into all of the distribution or distributed energy resource planning that we're doing, and grid modernization efforts.
Yeah, and on the next slide, you'll see a lot of it tie into the things that you interface with. So just one more minute on the previous slide, Angela.
Oh, sorry. Let me go back.
I just want to define the remaining pillars. What we mean by a modernized grid is a platform that is a multi-directional grid that optimizes both planning and operations in a way that facilitates the clean energy transition, right? And this is done for every single customer. We have plug and play, which is focusing on interconnection and improved access to grid edge technologies as a way to accelerate the clean energy transition. And by evolution, we want to work with all of you today in this meeting room, along with the commission, any other utilities that might not be present here, to identify what are the critical regulatory rulemaking or cultural barriers that may exist that can be addressed through the DSP process as a way to create a more equitable outcome for the clean energy transition. This can be something as simple as, what should the rules of interconnection be? This can be as simple as, maybe simple is not the right word, but this can be as kind of simply stating, how should we think about cost effectiveness and things like that. It can go to more complex things, such as, what should the proposed utility business model be? How should we consider non-wire solutions compared to wired solutions? How should that approval process work for those types of solutions? All right. With that, I want to move to the next slide, and I really envision that this slide becomes the core of the discussion for today. So the way we operationalize this is we identify a customer need, right? And this customer need is informed by our interaction with you, the partners, our interaction with the community, our understanding of what other utilities are doing, and the like. And so these are just some example rows of different customer needs. And this is not meant to be exhaustive. This is not meant to be even accurate, right? Like, affordability means different thing for different people. What is affordability in a commercial sense versus a small business sense versus a residential sense? So these things are obviously more nuanced, but this table tries to capture it at a high level, right? So we have a customer need that we have defined. And for that customer need, we are going to try and create products and services that help meet that customer need. And so some examples of products and services that can help with affordability are non-wire solutions, flexible loads, customer analytics, the residential line extension allowance, right? All of these enable some degree of affordability. Are these doing everything they need to? Maybe, maybe not, right? Like those are the types of feedback that we require as we kind of grow and evolve our kind of product base. However, the key part here that we are trying to address through the DSP is what do we need in order to enable and fully realize the value of these products, right? Do we need to work a lot with the community? Do we need to work a little with the community for affordability, right? And as an example, I have shown that like we need to work a lot with the community, right? We really need to dig in and understand what the barriers are if we want to address the problem of affordability through our products and services. Similarly, we know that we need to modernize the grid. Is all grid modernization focused on affordability? No. A large part of it can be used for these products and services, yes. So that's kind of how I would think about it. Similarly, for plug and play, there are some products that can be helped with plug and play related milestones, and there are some that will not be impacted. And similarly, we know that there is a significant amount of evolution that is required, right? Like we've seen that in the legislative session through different bills, trying to make different carve-outs. We are seeing that through specific data requests of demographics and other things that are asked here. So we know that there are different elements of like evolution of the ecosystem that is required, including regulatory and rule changes that enable the products that meet the customer need. And so with that, that process kind of repeated for each row. And that kind of sets the basis for how we see the DSP enabling the goals that were set out by the three drivers that we previously identified, right? So that's the link there. And the products are the ones that are crucial to ensuring that the goal is met. But at the same time, to enable the product, we have the 4 pillars. Okay, I'm going to stop here. This was a lot of information, and I do want to state that most of the next meeting is focused primarily on the long-term plan. So we will go through all of this again, but I wanted to make sure that you guys at least get like a sneak preview and get the juices flowing so that you can have more helpful feedback now or even next month, right? I see there are a couple questions. Stephen?
Yeah, hey, Nate, thanks for calling on the, yeah, so just initial comment, I think you guys are trending in the right direction for the long-term vision. Just one caution, is that what TMIX is advocating is that we don't need that long-term vision in Oregon to last, 15, 20 years. With the data that I heard today and the granularity of data, improving your server systems, and this might be a policy thing to get, ROI back on a non-traditional hardware aspect. But leveraging the data sets that you guys have now, incorporating, dynamic pricing into this data set can really lead to good outcomes related to your slide 43, right? And so it's really just articulating those benefits and how they meet those benefits for the products, right? So I don't know if that slide 43 is going to have actual products associated with it eventually, but for the bulk of that information, I think you guys are on the right track. It's just getting to that right track in a quicker time period would be TMIX's and I think Oregon in general's, hope, right?
Yeah, Stephen, I really appreciate that feedback. I do want to state that a couple slides ago, we did talk about how this is the 10-year vision. And we'll talk about some of the nuances within that 10-year vision in the following months. So a lot of what you are talking about is a part of our consideration, right? We are looking at all of our systems holistically. We are looking at all the way from a physical grid infrastructure to the telecommunication equipment, to the sensing equipment, to our data management systems, to creating customer applications, to creating products that enable different customer applications. So we are looking at the whole gambit. And I believe about 3 months ago on this very same forum, we did present our sort of first draft of the types of technologies we were looking at and how those will help this process. And those kind of fall under the modernized grid pillar here. So we'll talk about that in more detail. And I think that's where some of the specific questions that you're asking can be addressed.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Thanks.
Any other questions?
So I guess I would say, Nahid, I think what you presented here is really important. We probably should bring this up front and center in our July meeting too, to give you some more space to talk through these concepts when everybody's not tired and ready to go to lunch. But I would say that our ask here, we will send out a template for our report that outlines what you just showed. We'll seek feedback on what we're missing or what we should include in that template. Another process in which you will do is you're creating visuals. So some of the feedback that we've heard from our partners is that this is very heavy, technical heavy information, and that one of the things that would be helpful is having some educational or outreach type of materials. And so Nahid, you're working to create different tiles or visuals that will show how we will get to each of these approaches. And one of the things that you want to start with is a sense of place rather than focusing on the technologies that go into a community. It's making sure that we have the concept of community correct first, and we would send those visuals out to the group to make sure that that sense of place is defined correctly as people see community. And then once we have a general understanding or vision of what community looks like, then we layer on the different technologies and grid modernization efforts that would need to take place to realize that community. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to produce these roadmaps, and we want to produce specific tiles that focus on each of these pillars and kind of really draw out the point to an extent where it's intuitive when you look at the pillar what it's trying to achieve. And the hope is that at the end of this, everyone is on the same page with regards to what the constraints are and what the obstacles are that like we need to overcome as a way to achieve the future that we are kind of proposing here. So, right.
Any questions or thoughts on the vision? Okay, Nahid, thank you for your work on this, and we'll see you next month.
All right. Do we want to transition to the report, or do we just want to send that out?
Yeah, what do people have a preference here? I think we've lost a lot of people, and so why don't you open it up quickly and then show it, and we'll probably want to go through it again at the next meeting.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So again, to reiterate, we will be sending out this report in workshop 6 on the DSP website. We will be talking about how partners can review this in the follow-up email to this meeting. So even the partners that have dropped out will have a chance to review it, and hopefully by the time next month comes around, we will have some good feedback on this concept. Right. So this report kind of lays out the template of the DSP, which will be the document, the filing itself. We have provided some background information talking about sort of PGE's public commitments and then the public policy that's kind of driving a lot of this, right? Coming back to the drivers that were explained a couple slides ago. In addition to that, we have talked about how there is an evolving need for customers from a DER perspective, which gets to the driver of that aggregate impact of DERs. That we were considering as a third driver. So we've basically talked about the drivers in the background and as a part of the primary vision. But fundamentally, we've sort of focused our vision on creating a grid that sort of transitions away from a one-way grid to a multi-directional grid a multi-directional grid that's sort of powered by all of these different products, right? Whether that's batteries or solar or flexible loads, it's kind of powered by all of these products to a certain extent. And the way that is done is by creating a secure platform that sort of drives a lot of this value. And so that's kind of fundamentally what we're trying to get at. And we've talked about the strategy of how we get there, right? We want to do that by creating community-inspired and customer-centric products and services that'll enable the clean energy transition in a fair and equitable manner, right? We've shown that we have some past experience in doing this, and we want to just rapidly try and expand that in a way to meet all customers, stakeholders, public policy, and internal PGE needs. We have highlighted the 4 pillars, and that kind of is just an encapsulation of the slides that we went through. From a report standpoint, we will start off with a letter from our leadership talking about how PGE is committed to what we are trying to put out here. And then we'll get into a regulatory crosswalk. A regulatory crosswalk will just ensure that all the requirements of the DSP are met, and it'll tell you exactly how that's met. There's an example of this at the end. For those that are curious, so you can see that requirement 4.4.a is met on page number 7 as an example, right? So just kind of providing that information will ensure that we have met all the requirements, and it's easy for you to understand where the requirements are. We will then have our executive summary, which lays out the vision of the future of the grid. And how it will support all of these drivers and public policy and customer goals. This is part of the area where we will have some of the graphics that we were talking about, right? We want to have a roadmap graphic that shows how we will get from where we are to where we want to be, and the like. Our first chapter will focus on the future state. Right, we want to sort of lay out the vision, and we want to share exactly what we are thinking when it comes to the future of the grid. And at that point, we kind of highlight the different elements that are needed to get there, along with key obstacles and the pillars that kind of enable sort of removing these obstacles and enable that future. We then talk about our current state. And hopefully the idea is that if we move from the future state to the current state, it kind of helps you understand where the gaps are, right? Where are we today versus where do we want to be? And you can clearly see that there are several steps that are required in order to facilitate a more distributed future. Every subsequent chapter talks about the pillar, right? Empowered communities talks about where we are in our process to ensure equitable participation. It talks about where we are today. It describes how we aim to get there. It talks about the key milestones that help us get there. And some of those requirements are part of the key milestones that help us get there. And some things may not be requirements that help us get there, right? So we talk about a combination of milestones that help us get there, and then some other relevant details that are relevant to the empowered communities pillar. Each subsequent chapter follows the same logic for the pillar, right? So modernized grid talks about where we are today, and then talks about how we get there, and talks about the different milestones that we need in order to get there. And through that process for the modernized grid, we'll also publish a 10-year roadmap for all the grid investments that we want to make as a way to reach that end state. Chapters 5 and 6 get into the remaining pillars, which is plug and play and evolution. I will note that all of this is pretty fluid at this point, right? Like, are we married to the words plug and play and evolution? Probably not. We are still thinking through. We're still coming up with all of this. Again, this is a sneak peek and an example of what we are trying to do. So these bullets are not meant to be comprehensive in any way. These bullets are not meant to be showing sort of a realistic sense of what is going to be in the filing. But these are definitely some of the more critical elements that will be in the filing, right? So just sort of keeping that in mind. And then once we go through each of these pillars, we will add the relevant DSP requirements at the end of the pillar. And then we will kind of round out all of this by summarizing the document and kind of relaying our future vision and how we get there. And so that is fundamentally the plan for the filing itself. Again, we're going to dedicate most of next meeting to this topic. So there will be plenty of time to provide feedback. But if you have any questions now, I'm happy to take them.
Nick?
Hey, thanks, Angela. Thanks, Nahit. Just wanted to say, appreciate the regulatory crosswalk. That'll be useful for commission staff. Thanks for that.
Absolutely.
Well, we will provide this in our email out to everyone in the group, like Nahit mentioned, seeking feedback. Like Nahit said, this is fluid. We do hope that we can get as many comments as we possibly can by next month, because we have to start writing the report. I think it hit us this week that we have 4 months to write this report. And so our hope is that we could just get general agreement on the concepts and then really start putting pen to paper in, mid-July, and be able to have a filing ready for October. So that's our goal here. So we'll transition to the last portion of our meeting here. Thank you, Nahit, for your time, and we'll see you next month. And
thank you all.
Bashir, are you still on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Bashir. Okay, so let me pull up your presentation for you. Would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, I don't know why this keeps on going all the way to the beginning. It's very. Go ahead and introduce yourself, and I'll get your slides going.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Bashir Salpagarov. I'm an analyst in the Distributed Resource Planning Group, Angela's group. And I'm going to be talking about non-wire alternatives, which is part of part 2 of the DSP. And we just started. This is our attempt to initiate the conversation about non-wire alternatives, and just start sharing some information with you and hearing from you your thoughts and your ideas about this process as we start developing the process. And if you don't mind going to the next slide, Angela. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a background, we are doing this as part of a DSP because a DSP has a guidance for us in the section 6, where we are required to come up with minimum of 2 non-wire solution pilots. And in this attempt, we'll be looking into the grid needs that we'll be addressing grid needs, looking into various alternative solutions, as well as looking into economic analysis where we have to assess costs and benefits and justify choosing different types of solutions or alternatives. Doing all this, we also have to make sure that we are involved with the community to hear what they want and hear their point of view. If you don't mind going to the next slide, I'll try to be, I had a little bit more information, but I'll try to be as quick as I can because everybody must be hungry by now.
Thank you for those of you that are hanging in there.
So in preparation for the part 2, for the minimum of 2 pilots that we have to introduce as a part 2 of DSP, we are considering to focus in this 2 areas where we're going to be developing approach towards our T&D planning, considering all solutions equally from a societal perspective on making investment decisions, and balance our policies, our investment priorities, where we consider alternative solutions while including customer-sided DERs. So in our focus, we're gonna be looking into our projects will include these. Our projects will include these and other investments individually or in combination to meet the specified need in a cost-effective manner, considering the need we meet. They need to meet the state policy goals, ensure compliance, or enhance the customer experience. Let's go to slide 3, Angela. And in our attempts to, as we're looking into preparing for working on these 2 pilots, we are researching what is out there in the industry happening around non-wire solutions. As we're researching, we're learning more about different states like New York, what they're doing, what they have done. California, Minnesota, they have one of the better non-wire solution programs or pilots. We're learning from them, and we're finding out, as you may already know, there is no one definition across the industry that defines specifically non-wire solutions in a certain way or even close to, or not. None of it is very quite common. So by doing our research, we came up with this draft definition for non-wire solutions, and you can see it on your screen. Basically, this are our definition. Based on our research, we see non-wire solutions as inclusive of any action, strategy, program, policy, or technology that meets the definition and requirements in this slide. As well as, in our vision, examples of this can include flexible loads, demand response, distributed generation, distributed renewables, energy storage, energy efficiency, conservation, voltage reduction, advanced grid management, tariffs, communications, and etc. So what I'm trying to say is we are going to be looking at non-wire alternatives and non-wire solutions as broad as possible, not only limiting ourselves to demand response or to GG or energy storage. We want to look at non-wire alternatives, non-wire solutions as a policy can be part of that. Tariffs can be part of that. So various areas can be identified and not as non-wire solutions. So we wanted to kind of pass that to you, this information to you, to see what you think about it. And we wanted to share this definition, draft of definition, to hear your feedback, your thoughts about it. That's all.
So we have a question in the chat, Bashir. It looks like Joe has answered it, but for those that may not have seen it, what does wired solution specifically mean in this context? And so we typically think of that as anything that's like physically connected to the grid, like poles and wires and things like that. Bashir, would you like to add to that, or?
Yes, that's pretty much it.
And Jason has his hand raised.
Yeah, I was reading through it. I don't know that it amounts to any significant difference, but the wordsmithing, you know, are you looking for impact or input on the words, or how to phrase it, or is this something that we're just going to talk about, or would you like us to kind of think about this and what kind of input?
Just to see if it makes sense to you, not necessarily wordsmithing, maybe by definition itself, how we define it, what we consider non-wire solutions, and if you agree, that's great. If you don't, let us know.
Yeah, so I would say one of the things that we did, Jason, is we looked at sources for, like Bashir said, on, you know, what is a non-wire alternative? What is a non-wire solution? People use those terms interchangeably. We looked at how utilities define it, how it's defined by DOE, U.S. Department of Energy, or government sources. FERC has a definition too. We looked at the non-utility or public, non-utility, non-government definitions. So I forget what was there was one that we looked at specifically.
We looked at SIA, right? The
SIA.
solar, yeah, the federal one, not the OCA one. But yeah, I believe like Angela raised her hand as soon as I said that, I think.
Yeah, but really quickly to wrap up, Jason. So we looked at all these definitions. We combined them, then we circulated them internally to say, what are we missing? How should these be defined? How do we look at our investments today? And we worked with our transmission, distribution teams, interconnection. We have a team called SAM, which is our strategic asset management. We've circulated with our products and programs teams to say, what should we be including? And based on that effort, we came up with this draft definition. What we're looking for is for this group to provide feedback on, is this the right definition? Are we missing something? Are we using the right word? So wordsmithing could be part of it, Jason. Like if you feel like.
Yeah, like striking the balance between even maybe just jargon, industry jargon versus plain language, and then the correctness of it, you know, accuracy of the information or the definition. I guess one question is the word need pops up a lot. Could it be a non-wire solution is an investment intended to defer, reduce, or remove the costs for a specific wired solution to an identified grid need?
You know, this is interesting question because Bashir, like a lot of conversation we had is like, maybe it doesn't actually get rid of or defer a wired investment, but maybe it stacks on top of it to reduce some sort of needs. Like maybe we have a capacity need, but it's 10 megawatts and we do, you know, a third of that is a non-wired solution and then the rest of it is a wired solution. So we're trying to think broadly in how do we stack non-wired solutions to wired solutions. So we're not just eliminating a project because the non-wired solution can't fulfill the entire need. I don't know if that answers your question, Jason.
No, that's what I was thinking, like the same thoughts actually, Angela. And I think the words defer, reduce, or remove, like defer and reduce, are getting at your point where you can combine things in different hybrid combinations or whatever. And it's probably semantics of just how you see it, but like to your point, like the need might not go away, the need still needs to be addressed, but just in different proportions of different solutions, right? Or different combinations of technology. So maybe that's what I was thinking. Maybe the cost, maybe not the cost. Yeah, I think it looks good. I just wasn't sure how much input you wanted or where you needed it. But
as much as you want to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bashir.
I just wanted to add about the cost that we will still have costs related to NWS. We may reduce them, but I don't think we can completely remove them.
Yeah, maybe we defer, reduce, or move the cost of other wireds. Yeah, I don't know.
No, and Jason, another thing, Jason, is that in some cases, this might actually increase cost of the total project, but that doesn't mean that the non-wire solution doesn't have value for us in some other ways. So we're trying to capture all of those things.
I was trying to think about trying to find a way to work the word optimize in here, because I think that would be an example of what you were trying to hit, right? Like costs might go up, but maybe the system's optimized more.
That's a great point. Yeah, those type of comments we'd love to hear your input. The next step is, once we've defined NWS, is to come up with a criteria and a process that would show how we would select these projects and how the community and partners could get engaged in that process. So getting this definition will allow us to do that next set of work, and Bashir will bring that process to the team in the next couple of meetings. Angela, do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still a real need to have this definition make sense for the average person. So specific wired solution isn't helpful. I don't know what that means. And then Joe helped, try and kind of drill down to a traditional utility solution. But to me, it might make more sense to say, remove the need for upgrading or adding infrastructure to the grid or something like that. Yeah. Although again, kind of add on to the last conversation, that doesn't always make sense, because of course, if we add a lot of solar, then you need a wired solution to accommodate all that solar with the current grid infrastructure. So I don't know that I'm helping to answer it at all, but I think it needs to make sense more to the average person, and how it is now, either a specific wired solution. I don't think that's quite what we're getting at. I don't think traditional utility solution answers it either. Hopefully we can keep working on that.
You know what might be good for us to show, Bashir, is maybe we take this technical definition and then we do what Jason suggested for in previous comments about providing an example for baseline. So like maybe we could take this definition and then apply it to like example projects to help give some more context into like what would an investment that's deferred, reduced, or removed look like. And then Angela, to your point, once we agree, like from a technical perspective, and that this is the right definition, then we make a more common language definition. Because I think we'll need both for our engineers. We'll want something that is built into their process, but we could have an external facing one that makes more sense to everyday people.
Yeah, we can have something simpler and shorter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Angela, we went through this exercise to define distribution system, and I think you provided similar comments on that too. And we ended up getting to a really good place with the definition based on that feedback. So why don't we take it back, and then Bashir, next month we can bring back the definition. We'll send this out for people to comment on. We'll take feedback, and then next month we'll come back with what we heard and try to incorporate some of the things that were suggested.
Sounds good.
And is that helpful, Angela?
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Well, I have to say thank you everyone for staying with us, going through these slides. I think that the non-wire solution and the vision, long-term plan vision stuff that he's working on are really important. And so we'll bring those back next month and bring them earlier in the meeting, and make sure we incorporate any feedback that we've heard, and we'll send out communications that share what our ask is for this month, so it's clearly defined. And thank you for that feedback, and we appreciate your time today. And with that, we'll let you go to lunch.
Yeah, thanks everybody. This was a great meeting. Appreciate everyone on the
Thank
PGE.
you. Great workshop.
Yep.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.